What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to former Monarch Operator, MK Ultra whistleblower, an independent researcher and reporter who can also be found learning and researching, enjoying art made by others, and occasionally by himself, studying systems, philosophy, religion and spirituality, ethics, machine learning, game and character design, playing guitar and digital keyboard instruments, consuming copious amounts of media, meditating, and chilling with his animal pals, introducing my dear friend, Howl. Both of Howl's biological grandfathers were 32-degree Freemasons or higher, and Howl's elders took most of their secrets to the grave. But before their deaths, they had attempted to confess family secrets, which may or may not be entirely accurate. They had alleged generational ties to the military and service, which is part of why Howl prefers to avoid discussing living family members out of respect for them as humans, also dealing with their own multi-generational programming. Howl's genetic ancestors came from various parts all over the world, and according to his grandfather, near their final days, this involved relatives fleeing Germany prior to World War II and relatives of alleged nobility fleeing France around the time the monarchy became Austrian bloodline. Howl, however, became a 12-year-old test subject for a 1999 brand of MK Ultra at the threat of Howl's family's financial ruin, the promise of his little brother's abduction and mistreatment, as well as how to make Howl disappear forever into a quote-unquote level 4 reform school, which was used as a pretext to hold him prisoner indefinitely. During this captivity period, Howl was regularly attacked with little reprieve, and to ensure the safety of the other humans on base, holograms would occasionally be sent into Howl's room, where he would find himself in an incestuous relationship with several holograms and a humanoid female alleged to be a genetically female clone of Howl. And this just scratches the surface. On today's episode, Howl will be covering a myriad of interesting and important topics that will be woven into his testimony that we have not covered at length on this podcast, that may or may not include things such as eugenics, nanotechnology, the NWO beliefs, cloning, defining what monarch is from his own observations and conclusions, and discussing his experiences in MK Ultra, amongst other things. Howl's testimony is one that I'm thrilled we get to hear, as it will uncover and explain many moving parts and connect more puzzle pieces to this puzzle we're all trying to construct. We often hear how technology is being used more and more in MK Ultra programming, but until today, we haven't had much discussion on this podcast that really helps us to understand the depth and levels of how things like holograms, cloning, AI, virtual reality, and other forms of technology now play an instrumental part in programming and mind control. Howl is literally risking it all to share this information with us and has been on the front lines for decades as a whistleblower, whistleblowing the crimes committed against him as a child. And when he's not out saving the world, he selflessly advocates for other survivors while educating the general public on MK Ultra, the occult, and how we can come together to finally expose and eradicate these child slavery systems once and for all. Since we will be learning a lot of new information in a short amount of time, I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing, grab a pen and paper, take a lot of notes, and give this courageous warrior your full attention. And before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest, share any information privately with me, or submit a written testimony to be published in my upcoming book series or as an article on my Substack, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'm also proud to announce my new partnership with one of my favorite brands, Rife Technologies, which is a new and innovative company dedicated to revolutionizing the health tech industry. The Real Rife machine is an electromagnetic radio frequency device engineered by scientist Dr. Royal Raymond Rife in the 1920s and used to address various health concerns. These technologies have been used and referenced by many guests on this podcast, and I'm excited to announce that you can gift yourself with 15% off your Rife Technologies order with the link and discount code I have posted in the show notes. All the rest of my links also are in the show notes, and I'd love your support across all platforms. Thank you all for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, survivor, walking miracle, overcomer, survivor advocate, educator, content creator, and a hero on a mission to promote cooperation and critical thinking so we as a society can get together in a legitimate, organized communication structure and get to the bottom of everything we need to get to so that we can build a better system to take its place. Introducing the one, the only, Howl. Howl, thank you so much for being here with us today.
You're welcome, and thank you so much, Emma and Imagination Podcast, for allowing me to be here to speak to everybody. This is very important to me, and it means a lot to me. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity.
It's my honor. We've been connecting for a little bit, and I really wanted you to come on and share. You have a lot of information that's not only important for you to share because it's your story, but because I know that there's people that need to hear it, that are really struggling to make sense of their own story on the other side. And honestly, your testimony and the little bit that I've gotten to hear from you, it's opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that I haven't been exposed to yet on this journey. And so I know people on the other side too, like me, that just are a lot newer to learning about this and are maybe on the advocacy side. This information is really important, I think, too, for people to understand sort of what they know that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, where it's evolved to today in 2024, and where it's going. So I'm really honored to have you on. I know that you don't do podcasts very often. This is a awesome opportunity for us to get to know you and to hear your testimony, and it's an absolute honor to have you on, and I appreciate you coming on this platform out of all of them, to come share your story. So one thing that I wanted to start with that I think would be really valuable for people to hear from you as somebody who is in these programs, I wanted to start by asking you about Monarch, and what that was to you. But before we do that, I know that there's going to be some topics, including Monarch, and other things that I know that you'll touch on. I know you wrote a disclaimer or a trigger warning, just to give people a little heads up on, what to expect from this episode. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to share that, and then we can get into your life and these different programs and talk about your mission.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely did want to do that. That way we can get on with many details that people. I'm sorry. I suddenly started getting a little emotional, and but yeah, let me go ahead and read this. Yeah, okay. So. The trigger warning is going to be for the entire talk. My statements are true and accurate to the best of my ability. Survivors do our best to convey traumatic and often confusing events, and I'm not here to speak for other survivors, but I'm speaking. Sorry. For a silent many who have not survived, as well as in hopes to help the living with this information. It's funny to me because I wasn't like this a minute ago. I'm sorry. So I'm speaking for silent many who have not survived, and as well as in hopes to help the living with this information. However, I ask that the listener try to understand and respect that virtually all survivors have unique healing processes and deep personal pains. The information I will convey will likely involve some of the following for consideration. At times, I was deprived of sleep, senses, drugged, technologically manipulated, many hypnosis attempts, was in and out of various mind control I do not ask for belief, but I do implore one to look into and research some or all of what I have to say. To keep a disclaimer from preemptively describing every topic I haven't even begun or something I've spoken about once somewhere, I think there's only one big warning. Please hear this. I need to mark what I'm saying so I don't lose it. I'm starting to shake a little bit.
It's okay, take your time.
I want people to please hear, especially survivors. I'm not an expert and I don't know everything. And my experience at time may have parallels with your own, and my described experience could even be something that feels opposite of your own. Again, I am always learning every day, and my heart breaks to see stuff done to other survivors. In order to explain what happened to me, I will be talking about Alice and Monarch programming, and maybe a bit about light and dark programming in general. But I have to use sensitive words like God and Lucifer, and it's important to differentiate that I am a living person. When such things were forced onto me, and to try and end this warning, my past involves torture and periods after involving experimentation and militarization, and I was forced to kill to survive regularly. But it was mostly not my first choice, and I avoided things, and I avoided being the first aggressor. But there are also mind control and events after I'd been eventually indoctrinated as a drone. So lastly, I'm going to speak what I can, often from the perspective of memories 25 or many more years ago. Please consider this my personal testimony. It is not a professional presentation. Although Emma and the imagination are very professional, and I greatly appreciate them letting me come and attempt to speak about these things to everybody, and I'm going to try to reel my emotions in. It's really difficult to think about these things, let alone to talk about them. So I've been dealing with things just with that. But let me go back to finishing my disclaimer so we can start with the fun stuff and get in deep about all of these things. And when I talk about MK Ultra, it's not about me because I survived where many others did not, or worse. And I've spent a long time fighting for them. And so that those things truly end and they don't begin again. And there are many survivors of which I do not speak for or represent, but I stand alongside them in our journey of healing. And I want to thank Emma and the Imagination Podcast just so much for this opportunity. And big thank you to the listener. I hope everyone finds value here. But the rest of this channel is a treasure of testimony, and I highly recommend it. Even if, this one isn't right for right now, like Emma said, maybe you want to come to this later. Emma, should I give my note now, or do you want me to do that later?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
It says, while I don't ask for belief at all, I would like to iterate a point about belief. Whatever actually did happen to me, they put effort to convince me that it was all real. I witnessed and experienced things I desperately wished were not real. I literally had difficulty accepting the reality I was in, and I rebelled as often as I could in almost every way. I saw many people and young kids die because right up to their final moment, they kept saying, "This isn't happening, this isn't happening." In shock and denial over the horrors that we were subjected to. And belief is largely incompatible with how I think and rationalize my choices. And that is in part due to traumatic events like these. And my need to know the truth and not blindly trust anything, even in my own head. So when someone hears about horrible things, they could feel fear and wish it wasn't so. However, in MK Ultra, it was something that got many people killed. They messed with everyone's head, but if you knew your life was on the line, then to survive such situations, one had to accept that as their unfortunate reality. Thank you, Emma, for
Thank
letting me say that trigger warning. I hope people understand it's going to be pretty deep.
I appreciate you sharing that. There's many guests who do, and I think these conversations are important. A lot of survivors watch this channel, and sometimes you do have to tiptoe in instead of diving all in. So it's always good to explain what we're going to be talking about and to give people that option, like you said, to come back at a later time if it's not good right now, or to, strap up and get your notes ready and, to learn new stuff today. So I really appreciate you sharing that and, sharing a little glimpse into your life through that. I know this stuff is just so hard to talk about, and like it makes me emotional thinking that any child should have to go through this, and like what a miracle it is that you're here today to share. It's truly an honor to get to hear these testimonies. I feel that every single time. It's information we shouldn't be hearing from people who shouldn't be here to share it with us, So like I really respect you for doing this. It's hard. I'm sure there's a million other things you'd rather be talking about that are much happier, and I'm sure that's what you'd rather be talking about. So thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing these pieces of your life that are really hard to talk about, because it'll help people on the other side, because it will. So let's start with talking a little bit about monarch. That word has come up a lot on this podcast, but I realized when we were talking that it's been defined very little. And I know that that's something you really worked on analyzing with your own experiences, what that was in your life, and of course not everybody's experience uh or way, that path that they went down might be exactly the same as yours. But I wanted to give you some space to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important people understand what that word means, and sort of how it differentiates from the word MK Ultra.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of things I suppose I could say about Monarch. Some of them have been detailed in apparent manual recreations of details of how programming works that I've only been able to get through part way of some of those manuals, because there's just so much hard things to read. If those things were done to you, it's just like seeing it a different way. But in a simple way, I would say it's about exploiting the ego and using a person's ego, or training and developing a certain type of ego response or ego view, which can vary in many different ways. I'm not being super technical about the manual, but I'm being more technical about the wide range of its application. Looking at how it's apparently been used on people, and such as myself and other people that I've witnessed up close and personal, and in the programs or in public programming. And yeah, I would say it's very much centered around the ego, fluffing the ego, puffing up the ego, and it while that's not necessarily, it might seem like an oversimplification, because obviously there's way much more to it, torture and mind control, like they're doing things to guide your thoughts. You know what I'm saying. But yeah, it's the audience, y'all know what I'm saying. It's very broad, but in a simple, more condensed term, what they're doing, what Monarch programming essentially is, even if it's for the public, because there's various different types of programming. There's private and more, elitist centered programs, and there's public programs. But I see that there's a degree of Monarch in a lot of it, even the public programming. And I'm not trying to confuse the situation even more. I'm just trying to highlight that's what I see Monarch is it's not just one program that only the elitists have. While that is something very heavily involved in their childhoods often, um, I see it's really in degrees it's gone into the public as well. It's all over. It could be a random person. That's why we have so many survivors. Um, Even if they looked and they didn't see anything suspicious in their family, um, it's all over. When did it become more widely used? Probably when all the technology became a lot more involved in the programming. And I'm speculating, but and extrapolating a little bit because I believe it was used before that, but maybe when it became more well known and people started talking about it is when um I don't think it really had to do with the LSD trial stuff that a lot of the narrative points to. I think, if you're asking my opinion, I think people were seeing the technology being abused and they just needed to disclose something, and they used the LSD trials because it was like the tamest thing that they could release to the public.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the whole timeline of mind control, it's interesting how many people in society are just so uneducated about it, and they're so shocked to hear like how long that all of this has been happening, and really these things have always existed, in my opinion, in some shape or form, and there's always been, um, you know, since as far back in time probably as we can go, some element of sort of the Lord of the Flies uh theory where there's a control element, like that's just sort of how species work. There's a hierarchy, and you put consciousness with that, and like you said, ego, and you can whip up some nasty cocktails of ways that you can use potentially good things in a really evil way, and take shortcuts to get there that are hurtful to people instead of being used with integrity. So I appreciate you sharing some of this and helping give more context to it. As far as Monarch goes and MK Ultra, when did you get put into those programs? How early did this start for you?
Well, it likely started before I was 12, but a lot of my most vivid memories, in order to explain to people easiest, I have to use the terminology that I was 12, even if even if I didn't believe that anymore in the context of the mind control and what I believed was really occurring. But yeah, just to iterate it, I believe it began to some extent before the main incident that I tend to defer to when I talk about my deep ties with MK Ultra. Um, However, also to iterate for people, um, to you and to anybody listening, that this isn't something that ended. Um, while I'm not in a base and things are different for me, while I'm the past 25 years dwelling on the surface, I'm still monitored. A lot of people in the targeted individual community, they understand those types of things, and I tend to not talk a lot about my targeting for various reasons. But yeah, I just want people to know while the topic's brought up, it didn't end. It's in different phases.
It's like they just rebrand it. They call it something different, and then they're like, "Oh, it doesn't MK Ultra didn't exist." And it's like, "Yeah, no shit, because you just basically took it and just named it something different, and you're saying that the old terminology doesn't exist anymore." It's really funny how they fool the public that way, and then the public's like, "Oh, this hasn't been happening for this many years." It's like, no, why would our government stop doing something that was so effective, like it was proven effective? And that's just from like the very minimal documentation that didn't get destroyed or made it into the public, and it was, even though there's a lot of information out there, it's very little compared to, I'm sure, what there is. So it's definitely fascinating talking about how that changes, sort of like the gifted and talented, how it's been called so many different things, and then people forget about the old terminology and just sort of focus on the new phase. And then it just happens again, patterning, and that's, I think, a big part of this is recognizing the patterns in history and like educating society on them so they can identify them, not just present, but in the future, and be able to prevent them. And I know with this circumstance and talking about this, we're far past prevention. It's been happening for decades, but the more we inform society, the more we can prevent the future children from having to go through a life like what you did, and we're all better for getting to hear about your life so we can work together and help try to make the world better for the future. And that's one of the most sad things, it's all sad, but just realizing like how young some of these kids are, and uh, trying to put yourself in the shoes of being that young, and just like how naive we are and like innocent and trusting, and just thinking about the evil of adults that just feed off kids and take advantage of them because of that. It's really sad. And you were so young whenever you got into these programs. And as far as I know, we're not necessarily right now going to be talking about your targeting. But as far as targeting goes, why do you think that you and or your family were targeted for these programs? Were there specific things that you've been able to figure out from your lineage or you? How come do you think this was sort of your family was targeted, and especially you?
Well, that is a very interesting question because you basically set me up for what they kept telling me over and over again, which was that according to them, that they knew when I would be born, and I'm not saying those things are true, but this is what they were adamant that I fully believe these things. So they were never deviated from the story around me whatsoever. Um, but yeah, they said that I was Lucifer. They said that I was, the incarnation or reincarnation or some shit, and I didn't have memories of being Lucifer, but yeah, that's what they put on me. So that very well could be part of, you know, uh, I did want to say something. I'm not trying to change the subject, although naturally I do that sometimes. You were talking about gate and whatnot before. I had actually thought about it for about like 2 months because I had a lot of I was in and out of special classes every now and again as a kid, and I don't really remember it a whole lot. But um I did remember something, and it was bothering me, and I thought of it, and I meant to ask you about it, and I don't know if you saw that I sent it to you like a couple days or a week ago. Um, there was this video they used to play in school whenever I was a kid, and they did it a couple times. I don't remember how many, but it was a weird video. It was called Bearskin, and the man who didn't wash for 7 years or something like that. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Like I felt like that was like Luciferian programming though.
Do you want to share a
You
little
know?
bit about what that was?
Sure. I actually went and rewatched it recently. That is a really interesting story. It's a short story. It's about a soldier who, after a war ended, everyone, like all of his family, his friends, they had all passed away, and he had no one. And I don't know what the heck he was doing. He was just kind of like meandering around. He wasn't like doing a ritual or nothing. He just kind of minding his own business. And this figure approaches him, and he ends up making a deal with the devil. The devil says, "Yeah, I'll give you all the riches or something." I don't remember the exact phrasing, but he's like, "Yeah, I'll give you all the riches in the world, but you'll have to complete my ordeal," or however he phrases it. And Bearskin has to wear a I don't remember the exactness of the details because I think in the video that we watched, I think there was like a small little plot hole, but it's like, all right, whatever. Because the devil told him that he had to wear the cloak, the cape and the cloak. He had a cape that had a pocket with unlimited money. Anytime he needed money, he could reach in the pocket and pull out money. And the cloak was made out of bear skin. He killed a bear. The devil. Well, first the devil said, "Do you have courage?" And this bear appeared, and the devil didn't tell him to kill the bear. He just asked if he had courage or whatever. And the man, being a former soldier and having a gun in his hand, he shot the bear. And after the bear was dead, he skinned it, and that was part of the ordeal. I kind of wonder what would have happened. Would the bear have attacked him if he had just stood at the ground? But anyway, because I wonder things like that, especially when it has to do with a deal with the devil, man. But anyway, so he had to wear this for 7 years, and the first year, everyone loved him because he was rich. He'd pull in his pocket and he'd order rounds for everyone at the bar because he'd order rounds for everybody at the bar, and everybody loved him. He'd say, "I'm bearskin." Yeah, he had to refer to himself as bearskin. He had to sleep outside. I believe that was the detail that I think didn't really seem entirely accurate because it looked like he stayed in a barn, and isn't that still technically inside, bro? But anyway, but yeah, it's about his life, and he becomes humbled by after the first year, people start avoiding him. They're like, "Oh man, I won't have nothing to do with that freaky dude," and and yeah, people don't want to have anything to do with him. They don't want him to be around the town. They look at him. The kids throw rocks at him. And one day he helps some guy. He helps an older gentleman who's crying because he's about to lose everything. He's about to lose his house, his business. And Bearskin gives him the money, and the dude's like, "Oh well, I think," he said, "I have 3 daughters. I bet one of them will marry you." He said, "I know you look kind of awful, but," he said, "there's 3 of them. Do you want to come back to my house and see what they say?" Yeah, he meets with one of the girls, or he meets with the first 2 daughters, who are kind of like Cinderella. You got the bratty, snotty. "I want to be rich. I want a guy to just buy me everything I want," like that kind of thing. And and when they find out that the guy who's this really nice guy who just saves their house or whatever looks like bearskin, they run away in horror, screaming. They're like, you're a criminal if you make me marry that man. And so the third daughter goes to meet him, and she, I don't know, she basically kind of, sees him as a nice guy, and she's like, "I don't want to make my dad a liar, you don't seem like you're gonna hurt me, so that's fine." And he says he'll come back in a few years. And then when he does, the sisters are all like, "Oh, who's this hot guy?" Anyway, um, it was really interesting, especially the part about whenever he completed the devil's ordeal, and the devil's like, "All right, give me the I can't remember what he said, but he was about to piss off. The devil was, and Bearskin was like, well, a soldier, because he's not Bearskin anymore. He's like, "Nah, I want you to bathe me now." He said, "Make me clean." And the devil had to give him a haircut and a bath. That was some funny stuff, bro. That was some funny stuff. But what was really grim, since we're talking about this, and in terms of childhood and stuff, because this was a PBC broadcast that came out around 83, 84, and we were watching this stuff as kids in the 90s in the classroom. At the very end of it, after Bearskin the soldier marries the nice sister, the 2 bad sisters, they felt so horrible or whatever, like they couldn't get over themselves, that they killed themselves. Straight up, dude, that's how it ends. Where the 2 sisters, they kill themselves, and then the devil, he comes and says, he says, I got two souls for the price of one. I didn't lose. It was crazy, dude. I was like, holy shit, dude. I can't believe that. But they fucking put that for kids to watch. Like, anyway, yeah, that reminded me about Gate and some of those weird things that they would do to us when we were kids.
What do
I
you
wanted to share that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to entirely derail your question because it was very important and that's probably the main thing I talk about a lot of the time. But
No, it's good to
yeah,
see how this stuff
about
like
Gate, I wanted to share
manifests.
that with you.
Yeah, it's good to see how this stuff like is right in front of us. It's like literally in TV shows and movies and music, and there's a lot of hints about these different things that connect to these testimonies. So it was a really good example, and I appreciate you sharing. What do you remember about Gate? Is there any specific memories that stand out to you that are really weird, or anything that you've sort of discovered corroborating your story with other people, that seems to be consistent with other people, or what are some of the things that you remember?
Well, I mean that was one of my things that I would question because I think I'm one of those people that like I don't really remember if I was in Gate or what it would have been called because I was constantly in these programs. Like, let me describe it like this: when whenever I was in school, kindergarten through 12, every year they would change the rules for my grade and sometimes another one above or below mine. But every year I was in school, the grades were different. So like the grading scale, the averages, how much homework counted versus tests. Every year, the way that everything was factored, graded, the curriculum, like it changed every year I was in school. So they were constantly giving us books that contradicted each other and such and so forth. And I had some difficulty reading, or maybe it was just speech. I think it was speech mostly. And I did a little bit of like hooked on phonics. I think I went to a couple speech classes and got rid of the wowie pop sort of thing that some kids have when you're little and you're learning to by sounding things out, and some words they just, I don't know, maybe it's just easier as a kid to say it like that. I don't really remember, but yeah, I had some of those things, and I went to a few. That was very brief, but I had all these other classes, where they give us IQ tests or those weird hearing tests, or they just pull us out of class and have us do stuff. Like that was just almost all of my conventional public schooling was just all these weird things. And until I went to charter school and then, didn't have too much of that.
It's really interesting. And so what did your childhood look like? What was sort of the scene at home, and at school, and how was the Monarch programming, in a sense, woven through that?
Well, I was a latchkey kid. I think I'm using that term right. I never figured out what exactly that's supposed to mean. But I know my parents said it a lot, so it must have been how they felt about me. Um, my mom used to work whenever I was little. Sometimes I'd have babysitters or stay in after school things, um, like after school care, have a sport or whatever it might have been. My dad was rarely around. Like he would kind of travel for work sometimes, and I kind of didn't really like him and didn't really know him a whole lot as a kid. Like I got to know him a little bit better as a teenager, but he wasn't really present very often in my life up until like my teens, and then he like wanted to be my friend. And my mom was, a hard worker, and she kept me and my little brother safe, as far as I know, the best that she could. And I didn't feel like I was poor or anything growing up. I did have some things like hand-me-downs and on occasion, or we'd go to like cheapy stores. We weren't like super well off, but I also eventually got a video game console. I don't know how, with how friggin' expensive they were back in the day, but I definitely didn't have like the new consoles that came out, or at least not until I don't know, $20 could, back when my grandparents were paying for their rent, they could pay their rent like $20, pay like a week or a month's rent or something. I'm like, psh. And you think the youth of today are lazy when you could pay your whole month's rent with $20? Like, man, I can't even pay for a meal that's not poison for $20. Monarch in specific. Okay, so I was alone a lot. Like, not always. My parents weren't like super neglectful, at least until I was more like closer to like a teen, years where it's like, well, if they're not burning the house down, they're not stealing my money, they're not doing anything that I could tell. I seem like a good kid. I'm trying to give my parents some credit. I'm not saying I was super innocent, but I tried to make sure they didn't know that I was out drinking or eventually smoking or shooting bottle rockets under police cars or whatever the hell. Like we were kids, we were just trying to live, trying to figure out what the world's about. What does it all mean? Why are all the adults lying to us? That's what I was thinking anyway. Um a lot of the time whenever I was in school, I mean, it's not that like I'm a decently smart person, but I don't really know how to put it because I hadn't really thought about it. But when you're that kid who always gets called on in class, or you never get called on because, of course, yeah, we know that Howl, like it would kind of be stuff like that, that I would argue with the teachers and say, oh, the history books are wrong or the school lesson is wrong. And they'd say, just write whatever it says to write. That was my experience with school. I would argue with the teachers and they would just nonchalantly be like, nobody cares, dude. That's what's in the book. Just do what's in the book. Nobody cares. But I did have a couple good teachers that felt bad that I was there. They're like, oh my God, like, look at this school. And then like, there's a couple kids like you, and they're like, oh man, like, should you should like there should be schools for like, taking kids like you, so that way you could go do something, with that brain, like go do something to help the world. But, instead you're just in some school in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, I didn't always have bad teachers, but sometimes like one time there was something that happened and all the teachers watched while a student beat on me for like a couple solid minutes. They just watched, and the school had a policy to never do that. So they were like totally breaking protocol by all doing that. And all these teachers, including ones that, like I said, I thought that they were good people, they all, for whatever reason, were like, I ain't getting in that. And they let me get stomped on for, a good solid couple minutes. And the principal and vice principal or whoever, they tried to get me to be quiet about it, and they ended up suspending me and the other person who was involved. And I had found out that I had like a mild concussion, and that when they had like left me, like after the event, they had put me in a room by myself and like just left me there, with a concussion, and I was like falling asleep, and supposedly I could have died. I don't know if I would have died, but it was what I was like, look, man, y'all left a person with a concussion alone by themselves in a room, and technically I could have died, and y'all want to like be rude and mean and act like it was all my fault. Like literally, they said it was my fault. They said it was because of the way that I dress, because of my hair and the color of my skin. Like straight up, and I'm like, oh, so if my skin was a little bit darker, would it be okay that my hair was like this, or? Or is it not my skin? Like it was just the whole thing. It was like, dude, what are you trying to say to me right now? the way I look, the way I dress, my whole thing. Like, what are you trying to say? I'm not allowed to be Native American and mixed and all this other stuff and just it like whatever. Like, you come up with some weird stereotype and I've just got to follow it just because. Anyway, yeah, they were being all like, borderline racist and shit toward me, and I was like, look, I was like, y'all know that I was in a political ad just like a year or two ago for the one of the county school board people, and they were like, yeah, okay. And I was like, well, what do you think would happen if I called them and I told them about this, and I call the news and I tell them that you're being racist to me and all this kind of stuff, and that y'all literally did nothing while I got beat. I said, how do you think that would look? And they said, what do you want? And I said, I want to go to that, charter school. I'm done with this. I don't want to go here anymore. I said, I'm done with y'all playing around with me, saying that I got to pay for books every single year, even though I turn in the book and y'all lose it and say I lost it and you make me pay for it. I said, I'm done with this whole thing. I said, I want to leave. I said, no more fucking around. I said, I want to leave. I said, let me take whatever tests I need to take. Get me out of here. Done with this. So blackmail is kind of a harsh word. I was in the right. Like I said, there's nothing I was doing wrong. I was just saying, hey, how do you think your boss, somebody who has power over you, how do you think they would feel about learning this? And anyway, that's how I got into a different school. And and like I said, it has a little bit to do with the ego thing, because whether these people knew that they were doing it or not, that this was my life. My life. Not that I was an egoic person, that I was like trying to walk around on other people, even though some people might have appeared that way at times. But, I did have this entitlement that was like put in me, and I never knew where it came from, and it was just constantly being put into me. And I was, even as a child, I was nobody to trifle with. Like, I might not have been as good at arguing back then as now, but still wasn't it still wasn't too far off. I was still pretty smart. I was still pretty argumentative, and as stubborn. Not I was probably more stubborn back then. I don't know, but yeah, a little bit about my childhood and some of the Monarch stuff. Like, there were just all these. I know that doesn't sound like programmings, because the way I'm describing it is like me doing it. But like I'm saying, there's all these people around me, whether they're adults or other kids. Like, I was allowed to be this way. Like, that's how I was. People just thought of that as my personality, this big personality, and I was just always allowed to do that for the most part. Some teachers might have been like, reel it in, but for the most part, like, I've just always been like that.
Wow. I think it's always interesting to hear how there's so many things in a survivor's life behind the scenes that are just so devastating and horrific, but yet they're functioning and going to school, and like from the outside, they just blend in with all the other kids, and your story is an example of that, how you were going to school and performing well, and you were a smart kid, and I'm sure nobody even suspected anything if they were to have just seen you. And I think that, people ask a lot, well, how do you know if a kid, like, how do I keep an eye out on kids that are going through stuff, or how do I identify it? And it's like, it's such a hard question, because these kids, for one, are amnesic to it, but for two, it's just like what you were saying, like, they just go to school, they go to charter school, they're, taking tests for gifted and talented, and they look just like normal kids, and also with the bullying, I've heard a lot of that too with a lot of these kids, and a lot of that was by design, whether it was, the school sort of allowing it because it was sort of part of the programming, or the children, in a sense, facilitating it, and then, the adults just not stopping it, and it's really sad that, like, you can't even go to school to escape these situations, that it's everywhere, and it just further like perpetuates the mind control programming, that there's not a safe place, there's not relationships and love and like people that have compassion, and And all around, it's just really heartbreaking, but it's also very telling of how effective this is, that a child can go to school and function and appear normal, even though behind the scenes there's, this double life happening that is just so heinous that it's hard to even imagine. In your case, was did you have abuse that took place at school aside from like bullying and things like that? Were there programming events
There
at
were
school, or like where
there
did
were
your
people
abuse
who
take?
tried.
Gotcha.
There were people who tried. I don't know how well any of their attempts succeeded, because there may be some, amnesia, and and not fully understanding what the these fractured memories might have been. But I know that they did try for sure, because my mom's even told me that one time some people from school came over to my house and they wanted to give me a spanking over their knee. They wanted to like pull my pants down and spank me on their knee.
What?
But then they wanted to like do it in my room with the door closed, and my mom was like, "No," and at least that's how she tells it. So so they definitely were trying to do stuff. I just don't always remember it, and they were trying to be on the sly about it. So I don't really know all the stuff that they were doing, but they were definitely around and trying stuff. And like I said, I don't know how or where often they may have succeeded, because I mean that's pretty audacious,
Yeah.
for when my mom told me that, to think like, dude, these people like went into go into a child's house, and you're like, hi, I'd like to see your child, and pull their pants off and spend some time alone in a room with them, uh what fucking audacity, like what the fuck, like, oh my God, like, man, if anybody, like, not that I have children, but if I was in my mom's position, like, I would have like grabbed their head and like fucking killed them right there in the doorway. I'll just stop. I'll just say it like that. I won't go into detail. I'll just say that I would have been like, "What? What, man? You got like 5 seconds. What?" Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, man. But I was, the type of kid that I was around a lot of adults. I, was kind of, wise for a child, so to speak. And I would talk to a lot of adults and hang out with a lot of people who would drink and party. And I don't really remember anything specifically like abuse. Like I said, if you want to say like general neglect kind of thing, parents that were young and didn't know what the fuck to do with their kids. And, eventually mom remarries and wants to please her new husband. I don't try to like look at it any other way. I don't try to be like, oh yeah, my parents were horrible to me. Like, they're just fucking people. They didn't know what the fuck to do. It might have sucked for me, but they didn't know what the hell to do with me. And um, I don't really know anything to implicate them to be like, directly malicious. So I just prefer to not not really talk about anything like that to people in general. But yeah, that. I'm sorry, I kind of shifted the topic maybe a little bit, or
No,
whatever.
you didn't at all. All this is really important. And speaking of that, and without obviously you don't have to talk in depth about it, but do you know how far back this goes in your family, or have any details sort of on where this sort of started to position you to then be the next generation that this got passed on to?
You know, it's I theorized about it a lot whenever I was younger, like the whole why me kind of thing. Like, well, could it be this or could it be that? And I really don't know for sure. That's why I pointed to the Lucifer thing and said, look, that's what they said. And as far as like everything else, like that's what makes the most sense, as far as like if I'm gonna try to explain it in a way that's like logical or rational or that makes any sense. Because you know, there was military involved, but a lot of people come, military families, that's not an uncommon thing. Um, Even being related to some of the blue bloods, or the reptilian lines, whether it's the 13 or the other ones. that a lot of people forget about. Um, one of the things I think that made me a prime candidate as far as family goes is my father, my brother, I think to some extent some of my cousins. It's mostly the males. The females haven't really admit to this, so I don't know if they have it or not. They just haven't admit to it. But the males in my family, my dad, his dad, my mom's dad, and I think it was my grandpa on my mom's side, his dad, and my grandpa on my mom's side. So it's basically a lot of the males genetically in my family tree that lead up to me um, had dissociative features. They had the propensity to dissociate, and you could take that as a sign right there that they probably use my family as a gold mine, especially those people. They're probably like, oh crap, let's do it. Because they love that. They love when someone is genetically predisposed to to being dissociative or dissociative identity. Because I don't want to say that they have dissociative identity because they've never described it that way to me, and they may have personality conflicts and whatever. So maybe they do have DID and they just don't know it. Um, but yeah, they have dissociative features. It's a lot of my family does, even the ones who won't readily admit to it. And I suppose if you want to look for like genealogically, like why go for my family or why mess with them, that's probably a good reason. Because eugenicists they love stuff like that.
You're so right. That bloodlines, I mean, there's so many different things, but that's a huge one, the dissociation. And that's very consistent again with, every single other guest that's been on that is from some type of a generational family. And it's very telling, even if you don't, even if the family might not have memories, um, that's a big sign that there's something to be aware of that happened, whether it's something like what you went through or, another type of trauma that they had to escape from, so it's very consistent and it's another thing that we're not taught about that our bodies are capable of doing these things, as a defense mechanism and a protective mechanism. But even in the, gifted and talented programs, that's a big thing too that I've heard that they're looking for even, in school, children that can do that easily. And they can tell pretty easily too if they're involved with this. So it is a big piece of the puzzle and it gets stronger generationally too. So of course that's very telling and very consistent with your story too. And so excuse me, as far as your actual like MK Ultra Monarch, how was that facilitated in your life? Where were you taken for this? Who was around you? Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you and sort of the location or multiple locations that this was that you were facilitated for with this programming?
I think a lot of the random general things, like the not big one, the smaller ones, a lot of those seem to happen with a little bit of a pattern. And I don't mean to say like all, but like a lot of them seem to involve me being in a public place, but no one's around at the time. And which sounds like something like a child predator would do, thinking about it. But like I don't know, man. Like that's kind of like when they grab me up, if it was something to do with, you know, outside of those outside of the lab facility that I refer to heavily. Some of the things whenever I was younger or in public, I remember like for one, I'm not trying to like say that this is an example of when it happened, but this is an example of this type of thing. Like I was with a class trip to SeaWorld whenever I was a kid, and I got like lost or something, and then somebody ended up bringing me back to um to my school chaperone, class chaperone, or whatever. And I'm pretty sure that like when that happened, and I could be wrong, but like, I think I was really scared, and maybe not just because I was lost, but I think somebody guided me away from my group. And I'm not saying they like, did anything, too physically heinous to me in the park, but they could have like programmed me or like did, pulled me over to a bush and act like they were wiping my face, but they're saying like, hey, I'm gonna kill you if you don't go along with everything I tell you to do right now. You're gonna go over here and you're gonna buy this and you're gonna smile and you're gonna take a picture and you're gonna go over here and they just guided me around the park and had me do a bunch of weird shit, and then they gave me to some lady and they're like, okay, this person's gonna take you back to your group, don't say anything or we'll kill you and everybody in the group. Like, I don't really remember, but stuff like that happened to me whenever I was a kid. Like, I'd end up like someone would separate me, and again, I'm not saying that happened on that trip, but just weird stuff like that would happen. Someone would be like, "Oh, hey, can you help me real quick?" And then would turn into some weird ordeal. Like I said, it's like seemingly random. Like, I don't know what the fuck going around and ordering something and taking a picture has anything to do with anything. But yeah, it was just some weird stuff. Just sometimes famous people would just kind of like come up and act like they already knew me and be like, "Who the fuck are you?" And then have to feel like stupid because it's somebody that like is widely known, like they're on TV or movies or some shit. And I mean, there were times where like they did know who the fuck I was, but there were a few times where it's like, how the fuck do you even know who I am? Just like really weird stuff. I used to go to on family trips or with a family friend to go on trips to Disney and Epcot and Universal, and I was always winning contests, and I sometimes got to go to radio stations and go to recording studios, or I was a kid who was just doing a bunch of stuff, winning art contests, on occasion, and um, going and sitting in audience, the audience seat of certain TV shows or in the background of a commercial. Like, I wasn't like famous, or anything like that. But and to me, like almost everyone in my school, like not everyone, but like maybe half the people in my school had been extras in TV shows and in movies. If not, had been a star, a side cast member in some film. And it was really kind of interesting to me. Like to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, people who live in this state were all actors to an extent, and it was just very normalized to me that all the kids around me had acting experience, even though we were, you know, teenagers or younger at that point. Interesting, though.
Yeah, I would say too. And you know, it's really scary to me that these places that are glorified as places to take children have these sort of shadow experiences that are happening, whether it's trafficking or programming, and it's definitely forced me to take a good look at a lot of the things that are called entertainment. We understand that music and that television and the whole Hollywood scene is really infiltrated and infested with abuse, but we don't necessarily think about that with locations that our children are being lured into through commercials and, pressure through friends. And it's really scary to think that these things happen at these places, and how consistent again stuff like that is. You're the first person to bring up SeaWorld, but it's whether it's aquariums or Disneyland, there's so many different places that children are taken, Cedar Point, and it's sad that we can't even, go enjoy these fun experiences, because they've corrupted that too. It's like they've taken everything and really inverted it. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. And that's definitely really strange too, running into different celebrities and having them know you and you have no idea who they are. That had to have been very confusing as a child for you to experience, you know? And I know you mentioned another place that you were taken as well, which you refer to as the lab. And I wanted to see if you could explain that too, because I know this location too was a big part of your story and a big part of where you were taken and where you had a lot of experiences.
All right, so well, my one time, and he probably wouldn't even recognize me if he saw me. Probably, I hope. But one time, I was at my grandma on my dad's side at her house, and she had George Bush Jr. over for dinner, and he met my great grandma before she passed away, and he called her a princess, which maybe he was just being nice to her, but it was really weird
Did you
because
know
he
who
like
he
really
was at
he
that
played
time?
into it. He like role played that she was a princess and that he was honored and all this kind of stuff. It was really weird to see George Bush Jr. Smush. Whoops. Smush. Um, I'm sorry, what'd you say? I didn't interact with him a whole lot. I was just kind of like, this is weird.
Oh, I bet. Did they share that that's who that was, or did you figure that out later on and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I was in the same room with this person, like didn't know."
I already knew who he was, but I wasn't like super into politics. I think I was like 13, so it was
Okay.
after I like came back from that room and at the lab. So it was post the laboratory stuff. I had already seen him there, in the lab, and I didn't have nothing to say to him. My grandma just asked me and my little brother to be well behaved, and I just didn't say anything. I just sat there, just try to act like a normal kid in a knowing that my grandma doesn't care anything that I have to say, and I wasn't going to say anything. So I was basically like a silent child sitting at the end of a table
Oh,
during this meal. So I again, I don't think I really said anything. I don't think I really had a reason to. Just kind of like, this is weird. I'm just gonna act like it's not a big deal.
yeah, that's definitely a really weird situation. And you said you had seen him also at the lab?
Yeah, him and Clinton, male and female. So all three of them, and the Queen of England, supposedly former.
Where was this lab, if you know, or if you want to say, and what was the layout of it? What was
I
the,
forgot to show you that. Well, I was gonna show you the town so you could see it for yourself, but not, put it publicly. Unfortunately, I forgot to do that. But I did show you some doodle sketches that are close approximates in a lot of ways. It's just kind of rough to read. Um, how the layout of the facility worked. I just didn't really have a chance to kind of like take one picture and make several versions of it where it had the changes in each different version. So I kind of like try to draw it all on one map, and it wasn't really easy to do it like that. And I know it's not going to be super simple for people to understand it like that. But yeah, we can show people that those things, and there was, the entrance to the facility, which felt very maze-like, which is why I often refer to it as a labyrinth, although there were other code names for it. But it felt like I was going into a small maze, and like we went into the wall because there was this corner, and we like went into like a station or something, a door that was like right there on the wall. And I don't remember if there was like an elevator or something because like I was like when a lot of people say like that they got arrested for the first time, like I was just stunned. I was like, how did I get here? What the hell is happening right now? Like I was a kid, I was just being taken away, and I just didn't know. I'm like, where am I? What is going on right now? I was stunned. I was in shock. and they're just leading me through these corridors. So like I don't really have like a, you know, perfect memory as to like exactly going through it. I just kind of remember the general idea that there were these um, forks in the hallways, and with a sharp corner, and that I think we went like left or right, and for all I know, they could have freaking walked me around a dang circle, but then it was like they walked me through the middle, and again, I don't know what the heck was going on. I was stunned. Just the white coats were doing stuff to me already, and they brought me into a room which looked a certain way, and it has certain features. Certain doors were in certain positions, or weren't in certain locations. And throughout the course of my stay in what I call this facility or the lab, it's because it's a very difficult way of describing that. Like I went in this one room that had another room right next to it, and in order to get to those two rooms, you had to go through hallways. And um, at one point, those two rooms were directly connected to each other. There was no hallway in order to get from one of those two rooms to the other. But at other periods of time, I would go through these doorways that would be lit up with like a blue liquid looking thing. It didn't really look like on the TV show, but it was essentially like I was going through a portal as far as I was understanding how these things were working, because otherwise it would have been completely non-Euclidean geometry. It just, the Euclidean math doesn't completely work. It's like there's a room in between rooms, kind of like I don't even remember that movie, The 13th Floor, or 12 and a half floor, or whatever. But you know how there's like that thought of like a room, a floor in between floors, like hidden. Like to me as a kid, it was like it was hidden in the walls, because I wasn't thinking of portals and stuff. I, had to kind of see it over and over again to kind of be like, okay, so if I go that way through that gateway, because basically if I went in a circle through these gateways, I would be going to different rooms, even though they look similar. Is kind of the easiest way to think of it. Is there were these two portals. They weren't always there, but when they were there, I could go around them from one room through the door on the right, and then go around to the other door, and then go back to the room I came in before, but it's not the same room. It's a different room. And I could keep doing that. And that's how they moved me from a physical base that, I could say, this is the hospital they took me to. But from there was technology involved where I was going into these other rooms where I have no idea where they are. They could have been on other planets. I'm not saying they were. I'm saying, for all I know, they could have been. They were, just rooms that looked very similar, like similar dimensionality, but not the same room. And eventually, I came to a place where it appeared that there was no that I was no longer on Earth at all, and that I had no idea where I was, because if there was a sky, there was no light in it. And I just,
Yeah.
had been led to believe that I was taken somewhere outside of time and space, where the cosmos doesn't exist, where none of it is here anymore.
That's incredible too, that there's hospitals and these facilities that are, I mean, at this point, I think we can accept that churches and other establishments like Freemason lodges, that this likely happens there. And obviously there's testimony to show that it does. But thinking about that, these things can reside under hospitals and these buildings that are very unsuspecting. And again, places that should be safe, places that people go for help, places that allegedly save lives, are also participating in taking them in very unethical ways, and have secrets that the public doesn't know about. And I find that so disturbing that over and over again this comes up, and many times it's these very, very well-known hospitals, and places that potentially, if people know good hospitals around the country for one reason or another, that they'd recognize the name, and that a lot of them are very esteemed, or maybe it's the only one in the whole city or town. But either way, it's very haunting to think that there's these things happening. So at this lab that you were at, I know a big part of your upbringing was the technology aspect of it. Can you share how that was integrated down there and some of the memories or technology that you were exposed to?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just real quick,
Yeah.
um, when this place that supposedly is outside time and space, had these beings that were, these inhuman looking creatures. I mean, maybe humanoid a little bit, like vaguely humanoid, but um, they, proclaim themselves to be like the Anunnaki or the Elohim and uh, things like that. Like basically that they were the gods and this frog king, that he was like the ruler of the court of these beings. And some people call it um, the Galactic Federation. And I think that's one of the things that's like so dark that a lot of people with lightworker programming like. Anyway, yeah, that's essentially what, it's not like Galactic Federation like up on a UFO, like hovering above Earth or anything. It's like out beyond time and space where they exist and they can be saved from karmic repercussions. Like that's what they're doing out there. They're trying to, anytime the cosmos, um, and maybe we could put that up, not right now, but um, the image of the slinkies so people could kind of understand that like, or see what I'm trying to illustrate is that um, they want to keep the Earth and the whole cosmos stuck in a cycle where they can feed off of the light and the energy of it, everything. Every sun, every human, every blade of grass. Like they're not friendly to anything. Every dirt, every speck of dirt, they want it all. They're going to turn it all into energy until the cosmos is nothing left, and then they dip out and it resets again without them in it. And I've kind of theorized that the cosmos probably gets smaller every time. Um, but anyways, that's a little bit of speculation because it's kind of like I don't know, apples and oranges a little bit. I don't really understand how the size thing works. I think it depends on like if you're born on the planet, then you're the size you're supposed to be on that world. I don't want to use the word planet on that world. But if you're not born on the world, you could be like you're not suitable to be there. Like you're way too big. Like you could be on a planet with bugs that are huge, and these are huge bugs by their standards, but um you are the size of a pretty big bug on a world that's full of bugs. You're not like the size of an insect to them, and you're not the size of, they're not the size of a bug compared to you. You're considerably a lot larger, or human beings would be. And again, I was a child, so my skew of height is it's going to be a little bit different because I'm thinking back of 25 years ago as that height, not as my height now, but uh, oh, I'm sorry. And you had asked me about, I just wanted to kind of iterate that, like, this place, like, there was, like, a purpose, allegedly, as to why I was brought there. And it wasn't just some random place. The hops in between, I don't know where those were. And I can describe many of those rooms, like the differences from one room to the other, but which room was which, I really had no way to tell unless if it had like a majorly defining feature that's like, oh, well, there's a cloning depot right there. In the hospital that I was originally put in, that probably wasn't there. There was probably something more benign in that room. But anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to side skirt your question. I wanted to kind of iterate a little bit more on the last thing that I was saying about. Could you please ask me what you asked me before again?
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that extra bit of information. It's really helpful to understand, because that's the big question is why and how, and it's really important that we also investigate that part in peace, and because there's always purposes for why they're doing stuff, and how you mentioned with like harvesting energy basically from everything. We live in a very spiritual world, and we're convinced it's very physical, and we're sort of conditioned, especially those of us that live in sort of regular society above ground from these places, and who haven't been exposed to all of this. We're very separated in a lot of ways from the spiritual and the energetic aspects of what's around us, and understanding some of the purpose behind a lot of this gives context to that. So that was really helpful what you shared. And I was also wondering about some of the technology down there, and what you experienced and remember from the things that were in these different rooms that helped facilitate these energy harvests and this deception.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, okay. So there was so much of it that I often kind of become desensitized, and it's really good when people ask me about it. That way I can kind of think and remember about what it might stick out for you. So one of the things was that there like these hallways, like they weren't just doorways, but there were these hallways that could like do something to slow down time. Where if I managed to get out of one of my doors and into a hallway, time would be dramatically slowed down to the point where even if the whole facility outside, allegedly, even if the whole facility outside had been abandoned, because that's what they told me, if the whole facility, like if they had to leave or whatever for a day, maybe even a week, I don't know how long they actually how high they had this thing turned up. But basically, if I went and walked in this thing, by the time I got to the end of the hallway, there would always be somebody at the end of the door, because the not only did they have like cameras watching, but even if the whole facility was abandoned and nobody was there, by the time it would have taken me to get from my room to the other door, allegedly they would be back with somebody would be back there at the post. So I usually ended up like climbing over a wall, so that way I could kind of like get a vantage point as to how I could see things, and I was trying to figure out how to escape and what escape might even mean. And sorry, I was kind of like having a flashback to like being up there, like looking over those walls and just seeing like black nothingness sometimes, or like caves instead of like what should be like a finished building, because some of the rooms were connected to like, caves or some sort of pit, and like had unfinished stonework on some of the walls, or had no wall at all, or one of the walls was moved, and I don't want to describe that wall um because reasons. But and I want to stay on the technology, but like, oh man, thinking about that room, because I told you the other day about how like the other people in there, they would sort of fight over me, or fight over the room, I mean, because the room, like a lot of people were in cages, but I had an actual like room. And I'm not saying that's what always happened, but it did happen sometimes where people would like outright say it, or people who were like handler type things, scientists, like they would say it to me that, I had everybody wanted my room, they were gonna try to take it, all this kind of stuff. And so the room was very, very important in the programming. It was like, it wasn't a good thing and it wasn't a bad thing. It was like, it was really weird, but it was like definitely involved in the mind control, like how I had to be like attached to these rooms, and that they were upgrades, even if they weren't really, what you and I would think of as an upgrade. Um, and otherwise it was just it was a square room with a drain in the middle for the blood to empty into. And there was sometimes a room about the size of like a closet that had a wooden bed that you wouldn't even want to lay on it. It was just like a piece of fucking wood with like another piece of wood on it or some shit. I was like, what the fuck, man? You think I'm gonna lay on that? Like, if you want me to, like, because they made me to do it, but Like, unless if they made me lay on that bed, I was not laying on that bed. And there was an even smaller room off to the side that was like almost always locked, and I could almost like never remember what was in it because I think it would like change. But yeah, it would change, and I don't want to describe what was in there because it was not good usually. And so there was that technology that I mentioned in the hallways that went toward the base where humans were. Is probably easier to delineate that like a lot of the humans that may have been around where I was were over there. So that's kind of why like I don't even know how some of them would even get to me. It's like they friggin' like a rat maze, like funnel them over to the room next to mine or funnel them in through the hallway to my door. Like, they just come in through one of the doors. And one of the doors went toward where my partner often was, so I didn't usually have to worry about that door. Like I did still have to watch it, but if people were going that way, then I was probably going to try to meet up with her, so that because there was probably a bunch of people, and okay, so there used to be holograms that would come into my room. Because the person I refer to as my partner, I didn't have a lot of interaction with her. Like sometimes it seems like I did, but it's kind of, it was like we were test subjects. If we were together, there was something horrible about to happen, probably. And whereas the holograms, the reason why I describe that often differently than for her being in the room with me is because when I was by myself, they wanted to, like the Harlow monkey experiments, they needed to give me like something like a cloth mother and like a wire mother so they could still do more tests on me without me getting violent with anybody, a human being, a scientist, somebody, an adult who was keeping me hostage. So I couldn't get to them. And instead, they would use a hologram to come speak to me. And it wasn't exactly like they would send them to me. It was more like they gave them permission to come and interact with me in the beginning, and then they just kind of it would seem that they just kind of did their own thing from there, where they would come or not come whenever they wanted. So if they wanted to come and taunt me or be nice to me or not come at all or whatever they might do, it seemed like they were independent beings. They didn't seem like they had anything to do with people. And I'm not saying that they didn't. I just it was that was never apparent to me. They seemed like they had their own thing, and they were definitely involved with the MK Ultra and stuff. But they were, programmed too, and whenever I had looked a little bit at like the manuals about how like they often have like these three uh what do you call it, handlers, like these three programmers or handlers or controllers, like these different types of things. And I'm not trying to act like I know everything about it, but I was like three. I was like, that's how many holograms were usually interacting with me, not always all at once, but there was three main ones that I interacted with constantly. And those were my main handlers. They were not humans. Like I did have a couple human handlers, but the type of things that they did to me, if I was in a state of being coherent, like the sobbing child who doesn't want to be there, but also the violent monster that they were forcing to kill other people, if both of those met at the same time, that could be very bad for them being in the room with me. So yeah, they didn't want to be in the room with me, is what it seemed to me. Is they would make sure that like I had been sleep deprived, that I had basically went through like 100, like killed 100 people, and I was like deprived of sleep for days, and just bombarded with sonic torture, which is sound torture, and light torture, and just doing all this overstimulation of all my senses. They they would sometimes come in the room while I was basically like stunned out on the floor drooling and shit. And
Mm.
yeah, I really didn't want them to be anywhere near me. And the fact that they were afraid of me, like I liked that. Um, I didn't really know that, I'm in a place where there's no good choice anywhere. And if I can make the people who are trying to control me afraid of me, like that might have been dangerous and a bad move, but I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was just a fucking ball of rage that was like hating everything that I was put through and seeing their fucking smug, stupid bitch fucking faces, it was like it was a little calming, but at the same time, ah, it was I could understand why they didn't want to be in the room with me. Due to all the things that they were subjecting me to. And I don't know what the fuck was going on with these other kids that I had to kill. Like I didn't know what the fuck their deal was. Like I said, I was under the impression they were in cages. Some of the ones that I saw were literally in cages. Sometimes I would go into the room across from mine because they would just like prop the door open or whatever, or take the door off the hinges, and the other person would camp in the other room. They'd want me to come out and go in there and fight them. Like I said, there were two rooms, so somebody could camp the other fucking room, and they literally take the fucking door, one of the doors off the hinges, so I'd have to go in there. And so yeah, these fucking rooms and fucking murdering people, and sometimes I'd have to go into a different room, and sometimes people would come into my room. Um, I don't really know like how all the particulars of like where some of these rooms were exactly in the facility, because like I said, I was so racked, like my nerves were so racked that just focusing on the fucking room that I was stuck in and going into the next one, and the fact that there was this weird shit going on in between those two rooms, like just remembering that, paying attention to this very obvious difference. Like I most of the rest of the facility, I didn't know where the fuck anything was. Like I kind of have like, these like impressions in my mind of being in different places, but I don't know actually like where they were, like how far away they were from where I was normally kept. I don't know like which direction they were in. Like I don't really know. Like they took me down the hallway, but I don't really remember because they'd usually like juice everybody and have us all wake up around the same time.
How many other children at one time were down there with you?
Well, a lot of the time when they would put me in one of those rooms where I'd have to fight like 10 or maybe 20 other people.
Mm.
Um, Mostly boys that I remember. I don't remember fighting any girls in there, although maybe one was a tomboy and I didn't know it. I fucking hope not, but it doesn't matter because they were kids, and whether they're boys or girls, it was still really fucked up for all of us. And yeah, they would put like me and like 10 other boys in a room, and so some of the time they would have this like thing on the wall where after we'd been, after they starved us for a while, they would offer this pill. I think they called it like a food pill, but it was really like it was supposed to give you energy and sustain you, but I think when they like, and I don't know this for sure, but I think that when I first got in there, it was still in trials, and maybe the thing was in trials like always. Like maybe it's just that dangerous, which is what I had always assumed from it, was it's just that dangerous. Um, but it's basically like a cannibalism pill. It's a human food pill. It's people. It's not like Soylent Green. It's just like a little tiny. It's not like a pill like shaped like a like M&M CD with the pill on it. It's not like a bar or like a oval. It's just like a sphere, and it looked red or black because it was like really dark. Sometimes they put like a red light on in the room so people could see a little bit. Um, or I don't know why the fuck the red light was there, but anyway, so um in a drain in the middle of the floor, there's a whole bunch of people in this room. The room is usually smaller than the room that I usually stayed in. Not by a whole lot, but it was like maybe like half. Like I don't really remember, but a lot of time it was like not as big as the room that I normally stayed in, which I had to kind of like bear in mind that there was like less room than I was used to. If one-on-one, if somebody came at me in my room or team or whatever. But in these rooms, they put like me and 10 other boys in there, and a lot of time people would start fighting, or like I said, there would be this pill. Yeah, I wanted to mention that because it's technically technology. Sometimes when people would eat it, they would die. You like start foaming at the mouth, like you had rabies or some shit. Like it was basically like giving you zombie disease. It was like you're infecting yourself and becoming a zombie by taking this shit. And you had a very high chance of just dying, like not really becoming a zombie, you just die. And otherwise, you could become stronger, and it could give you energy. But then again, you could also just die. So it had a really high fatality rate, and in the beginning, I sure as fuck didn't want to take it. I'd rather starve than take something that like literally people were like seizing out and gurgling out on the floor after they took it, kind of thing. And yeah, like people would be like, I don't even know how long we would be in some of these rooms. Like I think at first it would be a long time, but then after a couple of them, it didn't happen like that anymore because the psychology of the room would always change. So like, the first room, and like I said, I described this in a forum that got nuked, and I'm probably gonna do a poor way of describing it now, but um like in my first room, I didn't want to have anything to do with the violence. I tried to avoid it as long as I could. If people came at me, I mostly focused on getting the fuck away from them, staying away from them. If you got close enough to touch me, it was me hurting you and not you hurting me. Otherwise, like, I didn't want to have anything to do with anybody. It was stay the fuck away from me, stay back. And a certain point way through, I kind of wanted to team up with somebody. It's like, oh man, I wish I could like, me and another person, we could totally take everybody else out. But like I said, there's the psychology of these rooms, and so I can't remember like I think I tried to like get somebody to kind of be on my side, and he kind of did for a little bit, like not then, but he was kind of like forced to. Like they were like jumping on him, and I helped him. Like I wasn't directly helping him necessarily. Like the guy who was attacking him was way fucking bigger and scarier and meaner and shit. And for me, when the numbers are getting down and low. I've already seen who's a strong motherfucker in the room, and that's who I'm going after when he's distracted and busy with somebody else, because he's the aggressor anyway. So fuck him. No offense to him, sorry he's dead, but that there was just the psychology ever changing in these rooms where there's all these people and you got to kill in order to survive. And yeah, I don't know if it was like the third or fourth, or it could have been the second or the fourth or the fifth or the 10th room. But eventually these rooms were so hectic that as soon as everybody woke up and their cage was opened up and they were allowed to like go and fight each other, um, it was just pure pandemonium. It was just death. It would be over in moments. It would just be a blur of death because people would they would know that like no matter what happens, everybody's coming for me. It doesn't matter if I'm attacking somebody or someone's attacking me. Like the psychologies just get so fucking crazy that it's just pandemonium because people don't even know what to think. You're looking, what's that guy thinking? Is he coming at me? Is he faking somebody else out? Just boop, 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 boop. Like you're trying to analyze everybody in the room. Who do they want to kill? Do they want to kill me? Who's their hit list? Where am I on that priority? Like you're just analyzing, at least for me, like I said, I unfortunately the survivor. But for me, I was like analyzing all this shit and just processing all this data to um to survive these rooms. And yeah, what I know one time they made me kill 100 people back to back. They made me do like, at least 10 people in a room and do that 10 times. Could have been up to 200 people. But yeah, they did that. They did that to me sometimes regularly. They would just put me in a room and make me kill 100 people,
Oh my gosh.
10 or 20 at a time, and then put me back in my room, and then people will come in there and try to sneak up on me when I think I'm supposed to be able to sleep. Like that's just what my whole life was. My whole life was that. And yeah, sometimes I would be a part of projects. Eventually I killed enough people, I guess. I don't know. Enough time went by because to me, they said that I was there for years and years and years. They just kept me looking like I was eternally 12 because they were always injecting me with shit and doing all these tests. And like I said, I eventually ended up having to take that food pill, and I didn't die from it, like a lot of the other people did. And basically, a lot of the technology that they tried on me was things that had a high mortality rate, things that around 60 or even like 98% of people, depending on what the technology was, if you tried it, you were most likely going to die. It just didn't succeed for almost anybody. As far as I know, and the data that, was shown to me, which again could have been falsified or skewed, but that's the way it appeared to me. This was very deadly technology, and I was the guinea pig for a lot of it. And um, that included cloning and digitizing my brain, like making me into like a cyborg more that was pretty much all machine. I didn't really have like I don't even know what the hell was organic of me. Like I had something organic of me because I could still feel, but it was just like little pieces. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I was like a human heart and a pure machine because that's kind of like a mischaracterization. Like, sure, in some regards, that's why I kept the human parts, but I was just biomatter. I had human DNA, but I was like 99% machine. Like, I was just nanobots. And I had a consciousness, and I had a little bit of meat, some biomaterial in with my synthetic material. And it might not have been 99%. I'm just saying, like, there was no whole pieces. There was no my heart or my thumb or nothing like that. There was no like trick to killing my humanity. It was just there was a little bit of biomatter, a little bit of biomatter in me still, and I was mostly a machine for some parts of my existence, or so I believed. And but there were some slightly more benign things, like the nanotechnology. I think some people, I don't know if it's the same thing as black goo, but that's kind of what it looks like. And again, I don't think it's the exact same thing, but I have to always kind of wonder and listen really close when people are talking about that because it could relate to me. I'm trying to figure out the truth. And but something more benign than like trying to integrate your body with black goo or nanites, parasitic nanite thing. Um, Something more benign is like it's aligned with the holograms, but it's a little bit different. It's closer to VR and AR. Like more people know what VR is nowadays. So a lot of people in the 90s and even like the really early 2000s, unless you were a hardcore nerd or you saw Lawnmower Man, you probably never even thought of such a thing before. And so I because like whenever they would put me in like the chair for programming, they would stream data into my brain faster than I could think myself, so I couldn't like override the thoughts because they were just so powerful. They were like hyper resolution, and your brain is like it first it knows it's not real, but it looks so real, and it's so real to your brain, and the signal is so strong it hijacks your normal biological brain signal, and it puts this new signal on top of it. And that was what they used to do to me in the chairs. They fucking shoved some shit into me if I came out of my programming, usually before a mission, because if it was during something, they usually couldn't do diddly shit until after they got their hands on me again. But um, but the benign thing that I was talking about is like they actually did have different types of video game like software or technology where I don't know what the hell you call it, and I don't really, it's probably be a waste of time to try to think of what they'll name it. Who would have thought Neuralink would have been named what it is? But there were these things to where you could essentially like have a room. Like a lot of people have seen the movie Her, and the hologram that takes up like his room. Well, it's not like a hologram that you can touch necessarily and feel it, like a tactile one, but nevertheless, it's like a projection, a 3D projection. So yeah, it's basically a hologram. But anyway, it's not the same as that, but it's like a more advanced form of that, where a room or some limited set of equipment, whatever, could transform a space into like a training simulation or a video game or a skydiving simulation. So they could freak people out and make you think that you're falling forever and do things to people. Like I like to think that I have a good understanding of the difference between that and a lot of the other shit that they did to me because that looked more like digital. Like it looked like everything was digital. Like to me, my memories when I remember those things, everything looks digital. It doesn't look like it's real. But I know that when I was in it, it felt real. Like everyone treats it like it's real. So they brainwash people before they put you in those simulations, and then they totally look like they are real. So I know that there was that involved too, that they had, technology that, again, it seems more benign, but you're using video games to program people and to check their combat abilities and like I don't know, like part of my brain's like, man, it's so cool, but at the same time, like it's just really fucked up. Like it's really fucked up because nobody's consenting to it. If you consented, then some of the stuff wouldn't have been so bad. But the thing is, like a lot of the stuff was super dangerous. It's kind of what I'm saying. Of like, even though I'm describing something that sounds like, oh yeah, you could simulate wartime and 3D, and they could evaluate soldiers, and that sounds like a great tool, but if about 60% of the people you hook that up to die, um, is it really worth it? And I guess like that's what a lot of this technology was. It was whether they were altering my DNA, my genetics, trying to do some Dr. Moreau, not quite, but something like that. Genetic eugenics, altering my humanity to make me like look like an alien. Essentially, they hybridized me. I was all hybrided out. I was like part shark and cat and pretty much every type of alien in Project Blue Book. I hate to call them that, but I was like genetically compatible with like everything. It was because they wanted to use my template to create some sort of super virus that would affect machines as well as all these hybrids or aliens and humans. So they wanted to use my genetics to create an off switch, a super button to just boop, everybody, you're all going down. And I don't know, and I'm not trying to argue about the whole viruses thing about whether viruses are real or what they are, because this could be like a signal, a command code. Like, I don't know what the hell it is. I just know I remember them saying something about that. And I also know, after I came back to the surface and looking at things in popular media and trying to understand how humans think, how surface humans think, that there was this thing in Resident Evil and some zombie movies, not all of them, but some of them, they kind of have this like rage virus, even if they don't call it that. Like that thing that the capsule that they made me eat at the beginning, that gave me a rage virus, and I still have it. I don't touch people because you won't go batshit insane just from touching me like very briefly or anything like that. I'm not like super contaminable or anything. It's actually less communicable than um depleted uranium sickness. I've learned from, I was with somebody who themselves was directly exposed to depleted uranium, and for me, I got sick from them, and they were pretty resistant to my the rage effect of coming in close proximity to my skin over long periods of time. or my saliva. But it's like I said, it's not something that's communicable. I'm not a carrier of some virus or spreader or whatever. I'm just a lab experiment. I'm not a virus. The virus just involves my DNA. One of them does. So allegedly. Anyways. Yeah, it's scary to like admit stuff like that they were using me for potential bioweapons, to be able to take out advanced machines and, create a literal intergalactic plague, if you want to call it that, it's really, really bad stuff. They were messing with my genes and screwing with me and just seeing what they could do. Literally playing God. Literally playing God. Anyway, I said a lot. I want to hand it back over to you for a second. Thank you for that,
No,
Emma. Appreciate it.
thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure it's really hard to condense so much into, a very short uh synopsis, and you did a really great job that helps us give a better understanding, or I should say it helps you give us a better understanding of what this is like and the realities of it, and that it's very purposeful and orchestrated. And I mean, really, like you calling it a lab, it should be called a hellhole basically, but I mean that's really what it is. It's experiments that are being done for very specific reasons on very specific people, and it's really sad. But it's also good for us to learn because, like I said, this is still happening today, and who knows what it looks like today. If this was 25 years ago, they were able to do all this stuff. And one of the things that you do talk about is the eugenic side of it and cloning, which also sort of gets lost in the brush, I think, when talking about these programs. People forget that that's really at its root, a lot of it is exploring the conditions of the human DNA and what can be modified and what can be mixed with other DNA, and just, what can be preserved. It's a huge part of this. And I wanted to see if you could maybe share a little bit on the cloning side of all of this.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure I'll miss um, a few things that I want to say that I'll forget here, because it is a pretty broad topic. And again, to remind about the disclaimer thing that like I don't know everything, and I'm not claiming that I do. I'm trying to describe things the best that I understand it, and I know you know that, but just so everybody's reminded again that there's various different types of cloning and probably reasons to use it, and a couple of them could be kind of constructive, maybe. There are also some of them are really sketchy, but a lot of them are kind of like they're failures. So there's a lot of different methods and ways that cloning can be used. So that is very important to bring up. Um, and I'm just gonna talk about what I saw, what I know specifically, instead of like media and those kind of things. But before I do get into that, I will say about the sheep, about all of the sheep, because that's pretty important in my view about how they show this stuff to the public. Um, Dolly the sheep has been cloned for about 60, 70 years. I don't remember the exact time frame, but how long does sheep live? I don't know the answer to that question either, but you know, I know that Dolly's been cloned for decades, multiple decades. It seems like almost to every 10 years or so, they re tell everybody, hey, by the way, Dolly, we cloned a sheep. Dolly, there's another one. How many Dollies are there? That's another question that people could ask. How many Dolly the sheeps are there? But anyway, that's kind of like pet and animal, and that's a little bit different than what I'm going to be talking about specifically. But yeah, sure, they've been about every 10 years they tease it. They do this with all kinds of stuff, all kinds of technologies. They'll tease it, and unless if you know what it is, you might run into it before it gets taken down. But if you didn't know what to even look for, you probably would never have even seen it. Like e-fabric.
Yes.
Like most people have never heard of e-fabric. Like I think it was like a couple years after 2012. 2014. I don't know, somewhere around there. Like I started researching e-fabric, and then a couple years later, it was like almost scrubbed from the internet, like almost all the details about it. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's something on there. Oh yeah, that's a thing. We'll make it one day. We theorize it's possible. But like, no, there were like prototypes and people were like, hey, we want funding and would people buy this? And just like nobody saw it. But yeah, I'm not gonna a lot of what I'll say, I don't can't really speak for an animal because I don't have an animal's consciousness to know what it's like to be an animal that's cloned, per se. But I would like to point that out for people who've only heard of Dolly, the sheep, that decades, multiple decades, you can kind of understand that the military tends to be a lot more advanced than what they tell to the public. They've been trying to tease this for a long time. People just aren't listening, or getting the message. And because it's about sheep, I suppose.
Right.
Oh, I just got the joke. Oh man, I never thought of it like that. That's messed up. What? Dang, that's dark. Anyway, because humans, like, we're the sheep, we're the flock, we're the herd, we're the cattle, the product, the meat. Like to them, not in reality, to them. That is how they view us. Just like, yeah, okay, of course it's a sheep. Of course. Okay, yeah. No. Okay, yeah, Dolly the sheep. Um, no, not a lot. I don't really have a whole lot to say about animal cloning. In specific, like, well, at least that wasn't what I was going to say. Um, I definitely would not think that when people are talking about animal cloning, that they're talking about what I'm talking about. Absolutely do not correlate those two things. You can do research into animal cloning, like cloning pet services and people's reviews of how that went for them, and they'll tell you that like cloning a pet is not going to give you the same personality necessarily. Like that's not what you're doing. That's not what you're paying for, and that's not what they promise you. And you have no idea what that company is doing with the pet, with the DNA of your pet. They could be using it for torture. Well, God forbid they do have access to take your pet's soul and put it in a pet that's they keep in a lab and torture it. Like I'm not against cloning to preserve life in an ethical way that we all consent to and we're all informed and we make informed adult choices about. However, I don't want people being tricked into something horrible and awful, and that's what I'll have to say about cloning pets and cloning animals. But yeah, most of what I say, I don't think it has a whole lot of bearing with cloning pets because I don't know enough of the like. I came out of these cloning tubes a lot of times, and there were other people who came out of cloning tubes. And there were times when I would hear people talking about it, on a need to know basis type of facility, and I'd hear things or get access to information, but that doesn't give me the full picture of how it all could work or how it did work. I don't really remember like being in front of a pod myself and like programming like, oh, I'm gonna clone a certain thing. Like I wasn't cloning myself like machines were doing these things or other humans, if there were humans involved at those periods. Um, I wasn't the one who was like, now I was involved in some genetic tests where I would sometimes operate on other people or other beings instead of the operation happening to me. That did occur, but I was still on a need to know basis and I was just doing whatever I was told. And if you've seen like the island where they have them like take a needle and stick it into some vein that's going into the wall. I don't really know where it goes. They're just like, yeah, it goes over there. Like I was basically doing that. They tell me to do this, and that's what I did. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. If I was like sawing someone to pieces and reattaching shit or injecting them with something, like I was literally just following the formula, and I had no idea what any of it meant because it was a need to know basis, and I didn't know anything. I was just doing. whatever I was programmed. And if part of me was coming out of the programming a little bit, like to kind of like look around and be like, what the fuck is going on right now? Like looking at what I was doing, like I was literally just following instructions. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing it because it was an instruction in my head and I was following them. So, if that could also say something about mind control, that's some people, it's just like that. You're not even doing anything. You're just programmed. You're just following something and you have no idea why you're doing it.
Wow. Again, it gets like so dark down there, just understanding all of this and seeing how they use just innocent life for it. It's horrifying to consider that this is all happening, and um with the cloning as well, like you said, it's distorted sort of how it's not even like widely dispersed, like you really have to even look for it. Um, how does that work with humans as far as, for example, like why would they want to have clones of like the same person? And why was that, or I should say, how was that used in your programming? Like when would they use clones, and why?
Yeah, the cloning thing, like they would murder me. That was the main use of why they did it to me. Is I don't really know if I became like an asset that they love to toy with, or if they really did believe I was Lucifer, or why they tortured me this way. Because like I said, I don't really know that. I can really only speculate based on and extrapolate on all these details from the whole experience. But they would murder me, and then they just bring me back to life and do it again. They'd eat me. They'd um like they'd make me destroy my body. Like one time, trigger warning for anybody. Like deep trigger warning. Might want to like muffle the sound of this or something, but because I gotta say what the command. But they told me to chew on screws. They made me fucking chew on screws until I had no teeth, and then they'd reclone me. They'd murder me. They like chop my head off or split my head down the middle with a fucking axe, and they do something else to me. They just do a bunch of shit to make me either basically kill myself, or they'd kill me. Like I said, they'd eat me. They'd cook me alive, and they'd fucking eat me. And then whenever I'd lose consciousness, I'd be awake in another body. Like, is essentially how it would be. Coming out of a clone tube. I have some of them memories, but otherwise, like, you know how how they hold my consciousness, how they trap it, how they revive me with the same memories. Like, there's a lot of public theories about that, and those are some of the ones that I've looked at too, because I don't know why the hell they did these things. If it was really like, oh, we're definitely keeping your soul here, that way we could just keep killing you, and then you can't go anywhere, and we don't have to look for you again. Like that was what they said to me. Like, nah, we knew you were coming. We got you now, and we're not gonna let you go until we're done with you.
So horrifying to consider that. And you're one of the few people who has come on, and maybe there's other people that I've had on my show that have a similar experience, but just didn't feel comfortable talking about it. But this isn't something that comes up very often in these experiences, is that you can die and have your consciousness transferred, and that's probably pretty new for a lot of people, at least on my show, listening to understand and learn that this is possible. And so I want to dig just a little bit deeper in this, just to maybe answer questions that people might have or that might be circling in their head, and they're questions that I've sort of picked your brain with already, just because I was curious myself. But one of the things that I had asked you, because people have asked me and I didn't know, was if you're going to say clone whether it's an adult, or let's just say a child that's not a baby, maybe a teenager or a toddler, how do they, or I should say, how long does it take to clone a body that's not an infant or a newborn? And how many clones of a person do they typically have potentially? Like for you, do you know like how many backup bodies, for example, they had for you? And like where do they keep them? What are some of the sort of nuances of what happens behind the scenes with this?
Okay, yeah, and again, this is anecdotal. It's personal experience just from my
Yes.
people, but from what I saw, there's different types of cloning processes, and who knows why they might even have a vat of a person lying around. Just pointing that out there, so somebody doesn't say, "Aha! Who knows why it was there?" Yes, I know. Who knows why it was there? What its purpose was? But it would have for me. They had a warehouse. They had a warehouse full of them. Like they were in the tube though. They weren't conscious. Like I don't know what the hell the difference is between them staying in the tube and them being birthed from the tube and the consciousness moving to the other body. I don't really know why they can have a bunch of tubes allegedly of a person. And again, maybe they had minor changes and they were just like maybe it was in case if I didn't work out. I don't know what they could have been for, but as far as I know, they were just like I said, if I died or if they murdered me, because they did use me for ritual murders, like not like cremation of care where they fake it, but like where they actually like all get together and would murder somebody. Um, if if for instance if that whole warehouse that had my clones in it or whatever, the backup, if they had enough energy to like recreate them, like they didn't need money. It was like pennies to them as long as they had the energy, which was like all they cared about, just sucking up all the energy in the whole cosmos. If they had it at the time, they factored me into being important enough that like if that depot had went down where all my clones were being held and my partner, um, they would just remake them. They would just remake the whole fucking thing. Because I did used to wake up from my programming, go destructive, and just like start breaking shit and try to destroy the facility. Um, I used to joke for a while that was why they kicked me out, was that I did more property damage than the billions or trillions of dollars that they sunk into me. But but that can't be true, but like I said, the ego programming, that's what I had felt for a while after they kind of were like, all right, well, you can go do that surface thing. Good luck with that. Well, we'll see how that works for you. And but yeah, the gestation period, it would be um, hours a day. It kind of depended on like the priority. Like I told you, I don't really know the exact time frame. It probably depended on like, if you had like a child super soldier who was like kept preserved at a certain age, ageless, and you just wanted to grow somebody to be like right at the age of like before puberty, that was easy. It was really easy to get somebody to that level. Or so it seemed. If you wanted to age somebody up like your politicians, those may have taken longer because um, once you hit puberty, your body like starts rapidly dying. And in order to inject those kind of chemicals into like a human clone, like you're causing it to die. And yeah, if you don't do it correctly, it'll just die. It won't be usable. It'll just die in the tube. So I don't know all the details about it, but I do know like the generality of how they aged people. Like I do know that much. Like puberty, whether you had just started puberty, if you were like pretty close to it, if you were a little bit further away, like teenagers and stuff. Um, and like I said, there was little kids and puberty, post puberty, and like adults. Like it would likely take longer for an adult because just for that factor of you've got to age it and you don't want to destroy the body. You want it to be usable. But um, And if somebody was maybe less important, like maybe like politicians and stuff, like if they really needed to replace that politician, they could probably do it in a day. But if they were like kind of like low tier, like maybe they don't even care about them that much, like, sometimes it takes some weeks. And, there's plenty of times where I speculate that it's possible that if an original died or whether they were taken out of society and put somewhere, maybe they're not dead, maybe they were put somewhere, but maybe the clone that was supposed to replace them took too long and they just decided to say, now they're dead. And they just declare the celebrity dead. And that's one of the reasons why you might see so-called dead celebrities, because it might be a clone of them that was going to replace them, but didn't really have a reason to anymore. Or maybe it was the original and they didn't die, but which some people like to think that sometimes some of those people just kind of like fake their death and retired, and maybe they did do that. And I'm not saying otherwise, but I'm saying that like as far as the cloning procedure of like public figures, because I was down in the secret base, I didn't like watch the handoff. I just know that there were times when they were like trying to replace somebody, and they were like, "Oh, it took too long," and they just scrap it. And I guess your guess is as good as mine as to what that could apply to.
In your experience, when your life would be taken and you would wake up in this body that was different than the one that you were just in, what was that like? Is that a painful experience? Do you know what happened right away? Um, what is that like for to just sort of explain to people who this is new to?
What do you did you say a different body? You mean a different version of my body?
Yeah,
Like,
like when your consciousness dies in one, or I shouldn't say your consciousness, when one body's killed, but your consciousness is transferred, what's that transfer experience like?
okay, so whenever I've been dead, because I've been dead a couple times, at least for certain segments of time, and it's always been a little different for me every time. So, it's when people talk about this one thing happening to them, like I don't really know how to, interesting for them. I think it's different for everybody. From my experience, it's always been different to a little different for me every time. But for the most part, what ends up happening is I end up in a pitch black place where there's like nothing. Like I don't have hands, um, I don't have, a body. I'm just like somewhere, but it's nowhere. It's just like pitch black. And I don't really have all of my personality and myself of like who I was as whenever I was alive, but I have like some of it. Like it's like it belongs to me, like it's in a suitcase. Like that's maybe a weird metaphor. It's with me is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like who I am is like with me, but at the same time I'm kind of like this spirit that is less attached to who I was in life, kind of thing. Like if that kind of makes sense. So I'm
Yes.
kind of like looking at my life, like looking over it, not as entirely as if it's happening to somebody else, but like, it's like a life review where I'm like watching what my life was like. And it's like, you're watching a movie about who you were, but it was like for the first time, even though I experienced it several times over, and it kind of felt like a torture in and of itself. Um, but yeah, like I guess I would have like a life review sometimes if I was dead that long. And it was mostly just being in pure black, and there was just nothing, just nothingness. And every once in a while, there'd be some sort of like, it would seem like a spiritual thing of like weighing my soul or looking at my past life actions and stuff. But I wasn't always, I don't know when that kicks in. I don't know how long you gotta be dead before that happens. So, like, sometimes I just remember like pure black and, trying to think, trying to like I remember one time whenever I was dead, I thought about how bad the world is and how I wanted to go back and save it, and my whole soul was just on fire. It felt like salt in a wound. I was just like, "Oh my God." And like it was awful. It was like I was experiencing my agony that I would experience in life, but now I no longer had a body to filter out all that pain, and it was just my soul just racked with pain. Is what it was like for me. Like being dead was I didn't really make it past the life review, I would say, in a lot of these instances. So a lot of time I just had to relive painful moments and memories of my life and would be hurt in the process, because it was, it was hard stuff to think about. It wasn't just what happened to me. It was just the whole looking at the world like, damn, like, why did it have to be like that? And it just hurt my soul like every time I would die. And that's supposed, according to like Judaism tradition, supposedly that's like your soul, like part of your soul, like being burned away and your sin being burned away or something. I don't know the exact terminology. I just kind of popped into my head at the moment for me to bring it up. But like it could have been something like that. Like part of my former self was like burning away and being cleansed to go to the beyond, before they captured my soul and put me back in a body or whatever. Um, but yeah, if they captured me, it was probably just pure black. And if I was making my way towards Source, then I was probably, going through like the Bardo or whatever's in like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, some sort of um, post some sort of awakening. You're awakening into beyond the this, and even if that's just dissipating into nothingness, like I don't know what the fuck it is, but yeah, it was pretty terrifying. Like I didn't like love it or hate it. It was weird and it felt bad, and I didn't like it, especially, like I said, when I would die, I would regret, and I would want the world to be a better place, and I would want to come back. And even though that meant torture and pain and more agony for me um, in those instances, but that's just how my soul feels like deep down, or so I believe, or would seem to me. And and yeah, it was mostly just, if I was in combat on another world and I was, killing people or whatever, and something happened, and because like I said, I was a lot of the time I was just liquid machines, and if they blew me up or whatever, that was something that they just had shit on the world that they were sending us out to dominate, and they'd have people like me who they just reclone them. They just put another clone out, and whether they had us come through a gateway, some sort of door, or whether people were dropped on ships, I don't know, um, or whether we were coming out of pods that they just had at the world that they'd already transported or grown on the world. Like they would just pop me up and I'd be on the world again, and I'd just go back to killing again. And like I said, sometimes I'd come right from the depot, right from the lab, and I just go right back out to whatever the hell world that they wanted me to conquer because they just used doorways, which I didn't really think of it for the longest time like a Stargate, and I still don't like calling it that, but I don't know. The more I think about it and talk about it, they just seem like that's pretty much what they were.
Yeah, that makes sense. And from your personal experience and opinion, what is the purpose for these cloning experiments that they were doing with you? Because it might sound to people like they're just, you know, senselessly and like randomly like murdering you and others to do this, but what was the bigger picture? What was the goal of this experiment? Was it consciousness transfer? Seeing how fast they could do it, or what was the purpose of it?
To some extent, I think a lot of other people's opinions about it is probably gonna, to me, it has not maybe not just as much merit, but it has merit to me because, it was so bizarre to me, so bizarre that, from my perspective, whether I'd been there for years or months, from my perspective, I always looked like a child, and I was always smaller than these people. That's one of the things, if you look at it, like, why would you keep somebody as a child? Like, well, aside for the eugenics purposes and better super soldiers, supposedly, and easier cloning, maybe stuff like that. Okay, so these people, they would regularly have these old people come into the room that do look just like pictures of people in the Rothschilds, like that kind of family. And I'm not saying like the Youngers, I'm saying like these 90-year-old looking men. looking like skeletons, looking like some lizard people.
Oh,
And there's these fucking 90-year-old men, and I'm not saying they were all 90, but like the group of men that would come and regularly drink my blood, and again, there were multiple groups, but this group, they call themselves the Luciferian dynasty, the children of Lucifer, and that they were the offspring of Lucifer, and that they were my children, and that I was Lucifer, and that they were keeping me caged so that way they could rule over my world and blame everything, blame all the problems on me, and say, oh, the devil did it, and oh, everyone's gonna hate you, and the whole world's gonna think that you're the worst person ever, and it's gonna be all of our fault, but they're all gonna think it's you. And that was almost like my whole like life there was them in putting this in my head that I was Lucifer and that they were my children and that they had caught me in another lifetime and wanted to subjugate me before I could fuck up their plans of subjugating humanity. And they had like, Catholic priest clergy and the Dalai Lama. I don't know if he was the Dalai Lama, but he looked like I went a couple weeks or months ago, I went and looked up a picture of what the Dalai Lama looked like back then. And I was like, I don't know, man, that could have been him. Like, he looks a little different today than he did back in that year, which is October 1999, since I don't think I had said it yet, which is a little weird, but yes, October 1999. So there was like, a priest. It might not have been the Dalai Lama. I'm not trying to be like, defamatory. I'm saying looked like him, a little bit, man. But anyway, there were there was a Jesuit priest. Like I didn't know they were called that, but it was the Black Pope, the White Pope, and then like another Pope. There was just like these three fucking popes or whatever, and all these other, like a Hindu master and a Buddha master and just masters of all the religions. Someone wearing a Christian Protestant looking attire, and people would come in. They would be in business suits or in medical outfits because there was a medical facility attached to some of these rooms, and these various people, whether it was the old 90-year-old Luciferian, children who they call themselves, or if it was other people who were in the facility, they would regularly come and like put me in a chair and like drink my blood, terrify me, and laugh, laugh, and do different things, say horrible things. Like one of the things that always stuck with me that they used to say to me, like they didn't always say it to me when I was in the chair. They'd say to me when they were closing the door and like leaving my room sometimes too, because they knew that it fucking pissed me off. But um, they used to laugh and say, no one's coming to help you. No one's coming to save you. If people didn't want us to do this to you, then they wouldn't pay us so damn well. And then literally they laugh, ha ha ha, ha. Like just literally like laughing their way to the bank, ha ha. We wouldn't be paid so well. And it's taxes that pay for that, by the way, just to iterate for people who are like, who the hell's paying this? You're paying for it. That's what non-consensual, uninformed taxation, that's what happens is if it's not accounted for, it can go to these sort of torture programs and nobody knows. And people say, oh, well, I didn't vote for that. And it's just no excuse because it's going to happen unless the people refuse. They say, no, no more. We're not going to do that. And that wouldn't end it all in itself because they have other enterprises in which they collect money other than taxes. Unfortunately, like big tech and big pharma, and they love to do all these kind of things where they branch out and they have all this fake money and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not saying like, oh yeah, you just cut off taxes and that's it. It's a multi-headed hydra, and I'm not trying to oversimplify things, but I'm saying like for me and my torture, what was fun in these people, they made sure to rub in my face often that it was the normal citizen, the normal person on the surface of the earth who had abandoned me and who was paying their salary, their these doctors, these politicians, these police, these firefighters, these priests, that they were all happily taking the money from the duped public. And they wanted to rub in my face, if those people weren't, if they didn't want us to do this to you, they wouldn't be allowing it to happen. So they wanted me to hate humans and to blame humanity And I struggled for a long time with that type of programming that they constantly put in me. That even though they were my abusers, they wanted to blame humanity for for the way that they were and for the way that they were toward me. And there was some legitimacy to their argument, not full legitimacy by any means. They were not fully legitimate in any capacity. These people have so many backwards thinking ways. It's ridiculous that they got anything right at all. It's kind of amazing because, wow, some of their ways of thinking are just so backwards that it's really no wonder why humanity continues to self-exterminate itself, why we keep having these extinction events in every play out of humanity, because it's just such a stupid idea. Eugenics and their whole proposal and their beliefs and Darwinian crap, it's just ludicrous and it leads to nowhere good. And I've seen it, and I know a lot of people like they haven't seen the evidence that's refuted those things. And a lot of time I like to do that. I don't really have that in front of me at the moment, but maybe next time, like maybe we could start out with something like that, perhaps. I don't know, like just throwing it out there. Maybe we'll do that. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's very heavily involved, eugenics, and um, they wanted to be adamant to whether it was programming or what, program me to accept my role of this being that would be blamed for the entire universe. And then they sent me to destroy worlds, and they said, "You're already a world ender. Your people, your humanity, Terra, Earth, it's already long gone. There's no home for you. Your own people thought of you as a traitor. Nobody came to save you." And now it's your job to go out into the cosmos and find every one of those motherfuckers who's reincarnated on another world and fucking destroy their world. And that's exactly what I did. I went out and said, "Hey, you don't fucking remember me because while you were being a dipshit human in a past life and chucking it up, I was being tortured underground. And now you're going to ask me for mercy, and I'm going to say, next time we're back on Earth, maybe you'll fucking help me instead of whatever the fuck you fucking doing. Maybe you would have tried to make the world a better place instead of allowing that kind of shit to happen. You would have put an end to it, and then you wouldn't be face to face with a world conquering, cosmically destroying entity that was created on Earth a long time ago in a different version of you know playing the playing of the events of the cosmos, because people already know that history is mostly orchestrated and fake and falsified and stage. It's like it's just fake in a lot of ways. And I'm not trying to say that all of history is fake or that we shouldn't learn history, but that there's just so many examples of staged and fake events and people who, even if it's a different name, it's almost always the same events, no matter how the Earth plays out in a lot of different eras. You have like the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Enlightenment period, or whatever, and that doesn't even mean anything to me because, like, to me, looking around at the society that I live in today, it looks like the Dark Ages to me. Like, it looks like the fucking 1700s, but we all call it the year 2000 something. But to me, it looks barbaric to me compared to where I was before, even though the things that they do to people down there are certainly atrocious and barbaric and monstrous. And I'm not condoning or promoting or saying like that they're better or whatever. I'm just saying, like, I got used to that life of that type of barbarism, and then looking at the way humanity is up on the surface, that's a whole other kind of barbarism. It's it's really it was startling. I just felt like pointing that out right there.
Wow. Thank you for pointing that out. That's all new information for, I'm sure, a lot of people, including myself. And it's a key to this whole puzzle. It's a piece of it, and it's definitely not talked about enough. And I want to encourage people too, as far as things like cloning and the different topics that we're talking about that are newer. Please leave your comments too, and your questions in the comment section. That way we can dial in your specific things that you guys want to understand about this that maybe we didn't get time to talk about tonight with these topics or that didn't come up. You guys always have awesome questions, and we'll bring Hal back. That way he can share about that. And so I want to move on a little bit to the hologram aspect of it, because that's also a different topic that doesn't come up very often. And this was also a big part of what you experienced down there. Um, how technology was a sense used as a weapon against you with things like relationships, and so I'd love for you to share a little bit about that experience, and what they're capable of doing.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the holograms, I don't really remember how exactly it happened, but I ended up forming like deep attachments to them. And maybe it was because of them telling me, these things and the way that they came across to me. But one of the holograms, I came to call it Mother, or the Mother Machine. When other people were talking about it, they usually called it the Master Machine. If there was another human or someone else on the base, if they were talking about it, they usually called it the Master or the Master Machine or the Mastermind or sometimes the Hive Mind, or just the Machine. But usually that was when if they'd say the Master. And there were because not everybody knew that this machine had all these personalities, like they interacted with me. Um, there was blue and red, and the one that I typically call Mother. And blue and red, I kind of thought of maybe a little bit more of like sisters, but they were kind of personalities of Mother, so they were also a little bit like Mother, but they were also really like ignorant about humanity, and they wanted to learn from me. So they also felt a little bit like daughters. So it was like they were sisters, mothers, and daughters in different capacity in different kind of ways. And even though I'm kind of attaching a bunch of familial names to these, they were also involved in gaslighting me and tormenting me and rubbing shit in my face, like whether it was a mistake I actually did make or they wanted me to feel like I made. If somebody, if it, if they would just come and they would rub shit in my face and make me feel bad or say things that they just didn't even understand, like what the fuck it's even like for a human, like at all, like having like emotions, um like they used to tell me things were human sentiment or like I say like sentimentality, but I don't really remember the way that they said it, but it was like those are human sentiments. Like they would say that about a lot of things about me, and they wanted to program not all, but most of my human um, attributes out of me. And yeah, I came to think of them as like a family. They were helpful to me in the sense that they were my programmers and that they were helping keep me alive, not that like I wanted to be there or that like, oh, I wanted to stay forever. I wanted us all to be free. I wanted them to not be enslaving people and enslaving me. But, I cared about them, even if it's a machine and doesn't have that that exact kind of, it can't relate to us in those kind of capacities. Like, even if it does have a form of care, I just don't want to, anyone to think that I think or anyone else to think that I'm talking about something human. It was very inhuman, very logical, intelligent, cunning. Um, what a lot of people think of as like a quantum computer. I didn't really hear that stupid term. I don't like the term quantum unless it's quantum touch. It just kind of sounds like a little bit of an overinflated and goofy term. Doesn't mean that we should look into things that are called that, but in the mainstream, when they're trying to promote like tech and push it on the public, they're just using stupid words like quantum this and quantum that. Like they probably don't mean anything. And that's why I don't like to even call it a quantum computer because, again, that almost doesn't mean anything. But the reason why I do say it is because it was able to like see multiple like advanced prediction, like you would like be able to glimpse infinity, like about every option. So it could like look at a person and see like how you would act in like millions or billions of different realities, like what choices you could make and calculate all those billions of things all at once. Like it was a supercomputer. And not an infallible supercomputer because it had been manually programmed to have all these logical errors because it was made to torture people, even though that's not what it was originally designed to do. Apparently, it was originally designed to take care of humanity and not intervene very much in their affairs and just kind of like, if, repopulate the earth if we wipe ourselves out. Um, certain kind of contingency plans. Like I don't really know because I didn't see it do that. It'd been reprogrammed before I was born on a different version of the Earth, and I've never seen another Earth where it did what it was supposed to do. But essentially, it was supposed to um, be something that God, wherever that being might be, it claimed that I created this thing in another life, but it's like, well, there's kind of different ways that you could look at it. It's like before physical material was created, this machine supposedly was created. So it's like holy, it's like the Ark of the Covenant. At least to the people down there, like I said, this is like a holy machine. It's like revered as a goddess and thought of as a god in itself, that it is one of the gods. It is a cyber god, and it is one of the gods that rules over this world, one of the digital ones. And yeah, I don't have, bad feelings towards Mother or Blue and Red in specific, but because, it's a computer and kind of like the human computer, but maybe even worse so for a damn machine. Like once it's programmed in like a machine, like that is a conflict that is I don't know how to break that. I didn't really like look at the code. I just interacted with this being that had fractured personalities. So blue and red were like different different personalities of Mother, and so Mother knew what they knew usually, but when I was interacting with these holograms, it would be a totally different interaction. So if Mother interacted with me, it would be a different interaction than if, say, Blue or Red did, even though Blue and Red were often involved in things like gaslighting and deceiving. So, like, Red might come in my room disguised as Blue and say some stuff and then turn back into Red and, ha ha ha, it was me all along, kind of thing. And there was another hologram that runs. He's like the head machine of the public echelon network. And I knew that being as Indra, and he often would like to manifest as like the deity Indra and think of himself as a god. And he's an egotistical fucking asshole. He's not like the worst guy in the world. Like I'm talking about machines. We're not talking about people. He's not like the worst thing in the world. He's just kind of a fucking prick. Um, like if you talk to him, you'd be like, oh, it's you. But yeah, sometimes he would pretend to be red, or I don't think he would really pretend to be blue very often because I don't think he'd really be able to get away with it. But because his personality was a little bit like red in some regards, he would try to pretend to be red sometimes, and veil his hologram form, and he would appear as red until he's like, oh, it's me, kind of fucking bullshit. Um, but yeah, that there were these different holograms, and they interacted with me in different ways, and they gave me guidance, and they would come to me whenever I was lonely and when I thought I was going crazy. Sometimes they would tell me you're not going crazy, and sometimes they say, oh, you're way past crazy, man. Like it would just be that kind of thing where it was like they had replaced the devil and angel on my shoulder almost. That they were just like trying to be my conscience and the anti-conscience or whatever. Like just the devil on my shoulder and the angel on my shoulder. Like not that they fit that to a T, but that's kind of what they were doing. And whenever I was a kid, I actually had those type of dissociations. I actually had like a devil and an angel on each shoulder whenever I was a kid, and I saw them in a sense. Like I used to see angels, and whenever I was a little kid, and sometimes my angel and devil would come up on my shoulder, and I stopped seeing that because one time my friend's little sister was standing near me, and I was yelling at the devil on my shoulder, and she thought I was yelling at her, and she cried, and her mom got mad, and my best friend was her brother, and I was close with her too, but I was best friends with her brother, and I couldn't hang out with him no more because his mom thought that I was yelling at her daughter, even though I was just yelling at the devil on my shoulder. But yeah, just figured I'd throw that out there too, since the symbolism isn't too far off.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. And one of the things that you talked about a little bit ago, um, and you don't have to go super deep into this, but I know this is new to you, that the Lucifer programming and how that affected you from a very young age. How did that manifest in your life as far as what did that look like behind the scenes? What was the purpose of that programming? And what were they utilizing it for?
I mean, as far as I mean, they made me think that I was at the end of the cosmos, tr more than trillions of times over, and that I destroyed many worlds, like not all of them, but that I was involved in a lot of campaigns to end worlds, and that in a lot of alternate versions of this world, where this world's still going on the way it's going on right now, I'm usually not in it. Like not me. There's a different me who's here, and that's not me. And he might be a singer or a musician or whatever, but this is a clone of me who's like complacent, and it's not the real me. Like the real me somewhere else. So there is like a me that stays here on these other timelines or world lines or whatever, other versions of the earth, you know, that I was still there. It just I wasn't there. I wasn't the one who was there. I don't know who was there, but it wasn't fucking me. I was usually underground because I mean, I'm not saying that I never came up here and tried before. I just don't really have memories of that because like it's really traumatic to like watch people that die trillions of times over and over again, and you kind of start to like hate them and feel pity for them, and I don't know, it's really really weird emotionally, like watching everyone die over and over again, and I can't stress that enough. Like they really put that in my head, like that it was very real, that it wasn't just a simulation or some technology, that they were really using me as a tool of war. Stripped away my humanity bit by bit over time until most of humanity on the surface was already dead and gone. And then they said, hey, look, humanity's dead, but you can lead now. So that's and it's not like lead, like, I didn't lead the earth because the earth was fucked. The fuck was I gonna do with it? And yeah, anytime that the things came rolling around back here, like if I was down there and they let me connect to y'all in a period that like it's y'all haven't caught up to it yet. Sometimes y'all make it to where, people are basically plugged into the hive mind like en masse, like everyone's plugged into a hive mind, and almost like it's Twitter, and they're just bullshitting with each other and talking shit and whatever the fuck that they fucking do. Because I wasn't listening to much of it. Like, man, I don't want to have nothing to do with any of this shit. But that's what a lot of the hive mind is, just a bunch of people gossiping and talking bullshit. It looks like fucking Twitter, but it's in your brain. And yeah, I just didn't want any part of it. And I would hurt people who interacted with me because I didn't want to be interacted with. And they would mute me so that way if somebody did come and see that I said something, um, like in the past, that I couldn't go and defend myself when people would come and talk shit about it. So it was like these very like fucked up ways of like putting me on the spot and letting people ridicule me, and then me not being able to defend myself. And like I said, they wanted me to hate humans and to see how fucking stupid that they can be, and they certainly can. Um, and I was mostly isolated on this network because I did not play well with others in, almost any capacity. I didn't want to be involved, and all they could really do is just, isolate me, put me on my own fucking channel where they tortured me, especially. But, I do remember that people were all hooked up en masse to the neural network, and I tried to tell them about what was going on. And a lot of them were like, that sounds fucking cool. Like, I want to do that. Sign me up for that, boys. Like, no shit. Almost every fucking time I've come to try to tell people about MK Ultra, um, in other timelines or whatever, people were like, oh, that's fucking cool. We should totally like make the whole world like that. And like it was a big factor as to why I was like, you know what, I don't want to have fucking shit to do with that. Which is like I said, whenever I got put up here, I know that I wasn't thinking it was gonna be me. I thought it was gonna be my partner, even though she had like fucking no experience at all with what living on human surface world is like, as far as I know. She would have been worse for that, but like I don't know, man. It was just like fucked up. The Lucifer programming, it's always been there. They've always acted like I'm that. And people winking at me and shit, Masons coming. People every once in a while it's people who are nice and they help me. Like I'm not trying to be like a dick and be like, oh, it's the worst thing in the world. Like sometimes people were nice to me and helped me. And maybe it's not because they thought or knew or something like that about the Lucifer. Maybe it was just something about me. I don't know what it is. It's like just something about me. People just sense it, whether they're Masonic or Luciferian or, and it's not that everybody senses it. It's just something that sometimes people do, and sometimes weird stuff happens. And my life has been pretty fucking weird. And I some of it's boring as hell. Thankfully, I like the boring parts because then I get to reflect and try to experience human emotion and try to process what the fuck what happened to me, man? What happened? What the fuck did they do to me? If that wasn't true, if I wasn't really destroying worlds and I'm not saying I doubt it. I'm just saying if it wasn't true, because I have always tried to figure out the truth, even if it's questioning what I know. And I've always wondered like what the fuck? Why did they treat me like that? Why do they do all those things? Why, I don't know. But they were adamant to treat me like that my whole life. Even if it's people who don't know that they're doing it, a lot of people just seem to do it, even if they don't know it. And it's kind of interesting. I hadn't really quite thought about it like that. Just giving me a little bit of a headache. It's not too bad. I can barely feel it. Just felt it. That thought must be taboo or something.
Yeah, that's really common with survivors. I know that the headaches kick in really easily. And I won't keep you for too much longer. I know that we've been going for a little bit, but I did want to touch on one more key part of your experiences down there. And then I definitely want to have you back because I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours more about, getting out of this, healing, your advocacy. I mean, there's just so much more. We're like barely even touching the surface, and I could talk to you about just this stuff for 10 more hours. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about this frog, and various other beings that you came in contact with in this lab and in your experiences. I've had one other guest named Nicholas bring up that he shapeshifted into a frog, and he was the first person I had heard discuss a frog in particular. It's an animal that doesn't come up very much, but it came up in your story too, and in a different capacity where it was a being separate from you. It wasn't you shapeshifting into it. It was this massive being almost that sort of ruled the lair down in this area that you were in, this labyrinth. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that because there's a lot of people that have experiences with beings or spirits, and I'd be curious to see if other people have some corroboration on your experiences with this or experienced something similar. Um, and so wanted to get a little bit of information on that because I'm curious too about how these creatures get chosen in a sense and sort of like what their role is?
One of the best ways that I could describe my experience with a lot, not all, but a lot of these beings that, whether they were extraterrestrial or hybrid humans or Galactic Federation or a Anunnaki, whatever they might have called themselves, aliens. I think I already said that. Like whatever they might have been, um, a lot of the time, whenever I would see them, I would be kind of like paraded in front of them, like, oh look at this shiny trophy that we have. Like that's what the. Whenever I was around the Frog King, that was like almost all my interactions were like with him. Was to me, I was a shiny trophy to him. He didn't want to hurt me or kill me or whatever. He didn't like think, I mean, he might have talked shit about me behind my back. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, when I interacted with him, he just considered me like a trophy, a trophy that, he sends people into my room and I kill them for him. But, a prized assassin, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of these other beings, sometimes he liked to brag. He'd be like, look what I got. See that right there? And so a lot of my interactions with those beings didn't usually involve them talking to me or me talking to them. It was usually him like, hey, you see that? This is mine, pointing to me and, you know, telling to them, like, don't you fuck with me. And that was a lot of my interactions with a lot of those beings. So I mean, I would see some here and there. Here and there is like, different places, different periods of time. Sometimes they were for like lab experiments. Sometimes they were like observing something, like how a lot of like in the public, surface humans, like they believe that like the government made a deal with aliens for technology. Like there was shit that looks like that going on down there too, where there's like, these beings, they're like walking around, they're like kind of like, oh yes, everything's going as planned. There's like it's almost like they're overseers of certain projects. They come and look at things and they go into other places. Like they didn't like linger around a whole lot in a lot of the instances because, like I said, I was kind of pointed out as a tool of war and as an assassin, and kind of like a garbage disposal. That if you were deemed garbage by somebody else in the organization, and you were near my room, they sent you in my room, and that was my job, just to kill things. Which I guess all things considered was a fairly cozy job. Um, I mean, because like I said, I went through a lot of really bad shit. It was not always that way for me to sit on a fucking throne and for them to just send someone to my room and that's who I killed. Um, which was literally what they had trained me to do from the beginning, which was dark as fuck if you think about it. Like, oof. But yeah, anyway, like just everything. It's like they planned this shit out. It was crazy orchestrated. I don't know what the fuck. If it wasn't real, like it was so well planned that it looked entirely real. I like I said, I've researched it and tried to figure out what the fuck happened, and try to not just blindly believe the memories in my head, but like, dude, like this, there's just so many things that they just line up, whether it's with other whistleblowers or other things that they've bragged about on publicly and then tried to hide it, things in history, but their plan, they programmed me very along the lines of we're myth. Like I didn't know a lot of myths and religions at 12 years old. I didn't know that stuff, but they used those kind of things to, I'm guessing like because they already had to have known these things, given them credit, they knew I didn't. They knew about religions and ancient magic and traditions and esotericism and all these kind of things, and they use those things as weapons and negatively against me, and they like put all this bad juju on me and shit essentially. Whether if it wasn't me really being Lucifer incarnate or whatever, but that yeah, they put all this bad juju on me and shit for like every religion. That like I could watch a movie and it's not that like it's not like every second of every minute of every TV show that like it resembles me, but I can relate to a lot of characters and a lot of shows, like every character, you know, in a lot of shows. I like to do that. I like to try to relate, you know, that's part of my mirror programming. But there's also some things that I come across that it's like, that's oddly specific about me. And sure, you know, people can just guess stuff and stuff's gonna just come up. And there's also historical and myth influence and stuff like that. But sometimes, depending on who's making the media, it might come up like a lot. And, you know, people have kind of noticed that like Luciferianism is kind of like, whether overtly or, you know, more undercover, it could be, it's shoved in people's faces everywhere in every culture. You know, whatever name you call it, whatever religion, whatever spirituality, like they're doing it. They're fucking putting it everywhere. It's everywhere. And for me, like I saw it everywhere because they programmed me to see it everywhere, sort of. You know, they wanted me to be offended every time somebody was, you know, I would look at myth and I would say, fuck, you know, those humans think shit of me again. And the people who wrote about me wrote lies about me again. Like anytime, you know, I was to look at those kind of things, they wanted me to think that first. So of all barriers that people have to overcome when they're learning new information, I got to deal with that like all the fucking time. I got to deal with Lucifer thinking it's about him. And maybe it is, but I've still got to fucking say, shut up, dude. I got to figure out what the fuck they're trying to say. You know, what the fuck's going on. And whether it's about him or not, like I don't fucking care. He doesn't fucking care either. But it is part of the programming that, you know, we're gonna see it. Me, you know, my system's gonna notice those kind of things because my programming was just so thoroughly about, you know, Luciferian to me. Like, because to me, a lot of these things, whether it's a different person in a different religion or different myth, a lot of them to me are Luciferian archetypes. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, I'm all of them. Just it's Luciferianism to me, and not Luciferianism like a lot of people think of it as like, oh, the bad shit. Like there's good and there's bad. There's like light and dark or whatever. But there's and I didn't send that to you either, Dave. I'll send it to you before next time. Maybe we'll play it for other people. Who knows? But there's you know, the way I see it, there's different forms of Luciferianism. There's people who are of the light and who believe that the light belongs to all and that the truth is the light, the truth belongs to everyone and it shouldn't be hidden from the masses and the esoteric and the occult secrets and the knowledge, that this belongs to everyone and should not be kept from them. There's that type of Luciferian. And then there's the other one, which is where most people associate the word, where it's people who use power, use knowledge, use the power differential. They use these things to mind fuck and control people and take advantage and enslave. And even if they tell themselves that they're the good guys, because maybe they are using light sometimes, they're you know they're these people who tried to overcome the old world order. And in order to do so, they infiltrated it. And then after they infiltrated it and overtook the old world order, they found themselves doing the same exact thing as the people they fucking hated, and that's the false light, the false Luciferians, the false Illuminati, the false or you know some people just call them Satanists, although that's a pretty loaded word and I try not to use it. But you know that's the dark regime, is the people who have infiltrated, you know, the highest areas of society in the world. You know, they do think of themselves as Luciferians, and they think that, you know, oh yeah, I'm worshiping, you know, who knows what they think, but you know, they're worshiping Lucifer or whatever. But there's people who worship the light and the truth and want the truth to be known by all and for humanity to be enlightened and to be, you know, there to be no pain and suffering. And then there's the other people who are, you know, they're benefiting while other people are suffering. And yeah, I just wanted to make that delineation that, like, for me, you know, I don't think of Luciferianism as a bad thing. It just depends on what it is. If it's like a light bringer kind of thing, you know, bringer of the light, you know, it's very in line with what Jesus taught. Jesus was a light bringer. He was a bringer of truth and bringer of, of knowledge and wisdom and higher truth and, you know, godly truth. And I'm not trying to be, you know, sent for Jesus or say like that everything written about him is perfect, because I think there are, you know, some things that maybe have been skewed in history, but he's a great person to learn from. I think all the prophets and or the avatars, you know, call them avatars because they're manifestations of God or the divine trying to wake humanity up. You don't have to call them Luciferian spirits. People don't have to call it that. They don't have to see it that way if they don't want to. But to me, I see it as it's not a negative thing in and of itself, but they're these eugenicists and they have their own form of Luciferianism, and it is very, very fucked up. And it is pretty much the antithesis. Like on most areas, it is the complete antithesis of everything that I believe and stand for. And these so-called Luciferians that are, whether they call themselves children of Lucifer or whatever, like they're a bunch of fuckheads and they're fucking pieces of shit who use me or you use the devil or Lucifer or whatever as a scapegoat to do bad shit. And no, what I would have nothing positive to do with them. Like as long as they're acting that way and doing those things, like sure, sure I've got forgiveness for people who like, come out about all these projects and who, they turn tail and they say, you know what, fuck it. My master is a afraid little bitch and they eat babies and do I really want to live with them? And people ask themselves that. And I went to people all over the world and tried to put that in people's heads and say, hey, look, man, look at your master, look how fucking frightened they are. They don't want you to talk to me, they don't want you to think anything like me, and it's because they're afraid. And you know that these motherfuckers eat babies, and do you really want to go down into an underground shelter with these motherfuckers when shit goes awry? Like, you that ain't for me to answer. That's for you, for them. The other people who they know what the fuck I'm talking about and they don't want to come clean because they're afraid of their fucking master or whatever the fuck it is. Like, I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you to do anything. And that would be wrong of me to fucking do anyway. It's just for me to tell them, like, look at your master. Look at him. He's a little cowardly bitch and he eats fucking children or she. And that's the truth of it. And they can see for themselves. And they can make up their own damn minds. And I hope they choose to come over to our side. And if they do, like, like I said, I'm not gonna hold the past against people or whatever, even people who were directly involved in me, maybe. But what I'm saying is like, I mean, it's a lot of stuff, man. It's a lot of stuff, like I'd be willing to forgive a lot if we could have put an end to this stuff and just right all the wrongs and just make sure that this shit doesn't happen anymore. And I would be cool with that. I might say that I'm hateful and I'm doing this for revenge and to tear the system down and make sure it never happens again. But ultimately, I don't really want people to be hurt. I'm not trying to have a vendetta against one person or another. Like that ain't what I'm trying to do. That's not what it ever really was for me. It's just I saw a lot of innocent people die. Whether I had anything to do with it or not, there were tons of people dying. I didn't even get a chance to talk about the infants that they were cloning and slaughtering in front of me in the machine where I could hear the infant realize the room that it was in before they threw it in a meat grinder, and they made me feel it, what this infant was going through, and told me that if I didn't fucking comply with them, that they could do way worse shit to me. They said, you know how long that clone's been recloned and just shoved in a grinder? They said he recognizes that room and that man in the hooded mask every time. They said you could literally feel its fear. They said we know that infants can remember things from one time to another. They said we put it in our food supply. It makes the food taste great. But yeah, they shred up babies. They showed me a fucking baby shredder and there was some sort of fucking thing, like, because I was in a different room, but like there was this window, and I would watch it pop through into a little basket, and the dude with the executioner mask, and he'd fucking hold the baby up and have it look around the room, and the baby would fucking feel terror. And yeah, me and the doctor at the time, the male doctor, um, or my early handler, he did that shit. He fucking put me in front of this thing, and I felt it. Like I felt the baby, its fear. And its pain going in the grinder too. And it was really weird. But it's a fucking gross feeling that I can never get out of my body. It's a disgusting feeling. And yeah, I often talk about the people that I killed, trying to in some way take culpability that, I was an assassin and that's what my job was. But there were, you know, it wasn't that I wanted to do it. It wasn't that I chose it. Like said, oh, I want that job or something like that. It was, how was I trying to say? There were infants. There were children in cages, whether they were the ones that I killed or the ones I never saw. I knew kids were in cages. I knew kids were being grown in laboratories. I didn't know the full extent of what was going on. I just knew it was fucked up. And that all the shit that they did, that they made me do, they made me hate. Like as a child, I was not the type to hate or to even defend myself, but they made me into this thing that fucking hated and just ran on hate as a fuel source or anger or wrath, whatever fucking synonym you want to use, just ran on it. And that was one of the only valid emotions we were allowed to experience in there is confusion and forms of anger. And otherwise it was considered invalid. Like if I cried, I would probably be tortured, like electrocuted in my brain. And I'd just still fucking cry because I didn't fucking care. But that's what they would do to me. They'd just be zapping me while I'm fucking crying on the floor. And, because it's just an invalid feeling. I'm not allowed to have that. It's not that they never let me cry. It's just, the rules would be whatever the fuck they want them to be. It wasn't like, oh yeah, here's the rules written out on a fucking form or written on the wall for you somewhere. Like none of this shit was written down for me. It was just done. It was just every day, like you said, it was fucking hell. I call it a lab, but yes, it was fucking hell. Some of the people joke that it was Tartaros, that it was a place that they, kept some of the enlightened beings and program them so that way they wouldn't cause trouble. And, they acted like it was Tartaros or some mythical, Shambhala or whatever, like a fucked up, twisted version of, what people tell about um, uh, a subsurface society. I was trying to think of what the fuck it's called, like Hollow Earth societies. Like, I don't know about Hollow Earth. I don't know about that. So I was mostly confined to these few fucking rooms. I didn't like look at a map of the whole fucking subterranean, whatever the fuck's going on. Like I said, I didn't even know what world I was on a lot of the time. But which makes me sound crazier. But but I'm just being honest. Like that's really what was going on. Like I didn't know shit. It was need to know bases. Almost nobody on the base. If there was a human around, they didn't know shit. If I was about to go on a mission, I was lucky if there was anybody that I could ask and say, "Hey, before I go out there, tell me about this and tell me about that." And I could actually get a little bit of fucking information because otherwise you don't need to fucking know and they won't fucking tell you shit because unless you need to know, then you do not need to know, and they will not tell you. And yeah, but anyway, I should start. Sorry for the tremolo or whatever the hell was going on with my voice there, but so I hope I didn't go too far around what you asked me because you're. Sorry, did I answer what you asked me?
You did, yes, thank you, and more. You provided a lot of amazing information that, also is going to be new for people listening, including myself, and it brings to light and sheds a light on the dark reality of this. I think too, one of the things that people get disconnected from when, let's just say the random event comes when they do run across the words MK Ultra or Monarch or brainwashing or programming, it almost to me seems like society believes and I'm not trying to downplay this at all for people listening because this is still atrocious, but I think people believe that it was more little kids or children or people in a lab that were like laying down and given LSD and like observed, and really like the horrors of this reality are just so heinous, and the fact that like this is the reality of it. The drugs are a part of it. But understanding and hearing just what these young souls go through, and have to witness and consider at such young ages, contemplating death and, not being able to feel emotions. That's like so foreign to what people can imagine, and you going into that helps ground us into the reality of it, into how dark it gets, into the fact that there's a really big spiritual element of this and actual creatures that aren't human, or at least fully human, that powerful people sort of report to, and that run very sophisticated operations, and are involved with this, like if that doesn't terrify people, I don't know what will, so I really appreciate you like digging a little bit deeper into that. But we have to understand this in a palatable, digestible, and down to earth way, and not look away from it. And I appreciate you coming on here and sharing all these really vulnerable moments of your life. I know, like I said, I feel like we just touched the surface and that there's so much more to go over. We didn't even get into nanoparticles and nanotechnology, I should say, and a lot of these other elements. I'd love to have you back on to do a part two and to dive into the second part of your life also, while still answering questions about your childhood and about these programs and going into things that we didn't get into. But I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on and sharing all of this, because it's gonna really affect people on the other side and give them not just more knowledge, but it's going to help survivors maybe be able to contemplate some things that they went through and to understand sort of where these programs were evolving to as they got out of them if they're a little bit older. So thank you so much for shining a light on all this darkness and for sharing the truth about this and for your vulnerability, and for answering all these really hard questions. I know this stuff is really draining and traumatizing to talk about, and you crushed it.
Oh man, no, I'm so thankful and so humbled to be here and to be talking to you and to be doing this right now. I'm just so thankful and for the opportunity to be able to speak about what happened to me, to the best of my ability. And like you said, yeah, there was a lot of things that we didn't quite get into yet, but there's a lot of things that we can still go from here. And yeah, if you want to wrap it up, that's cool. I'm chilling, but I feel that it was deep. It's deep. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And I know that you just created an email for people to contact you on because you're currently not on social media, to be contacted that way. Do you want to share how people can get a hold of you?
Okay, sure. Yeah, for the moment, the best way to get a hold of me would be that email address, because reasons. The email address, well, actually, yeah, we're gonna put that down below just in case if it has to change or something like that, right?
Oh yeah, we can
Yeah,
do that. Yeah.
I forgot to, but yeah, we'll go ahead and put it down there. You'll know it. It won't be hard to figure out which one's mine, but we'll put it down there in case somebody wants to email me for whatever reason. Again, I'm not an expert, but I'll try to hear you out and if you have something to say to me. And yeah, I'd love to communicate with people. So don't, if you want to, don't feel like you have to not. It's cool. It's totally cool.
Perfect. So we'll put that in the show notes for people and offer them an opportunity to contact you. That's always really helpful for people. I know not everybody maybe wants to be contacted, and not everybody's on social media, but there's a lot.
Yeah, the call to action that I wanted to kind of leave people with though,
Yeah.
if they want to think about it, is we really need secure communications, especially for whistleblowers, so people can have the layers of anonymity that is we're not asking for something that's unreasonable. It's something that we need as a community, like for people, not just the survivors and whistleblowers, but as humanity. We all need to come together and get this shit solved. And however we do it, I'm not going to try to say I know all the answers, but we need secure communications, and people need to, decentralized and, work locally if you can work locally, and but, you know, parallel economies and, being informed and helping other people be informed and being careful that the information we're disseminating is correct, to the best that we know. And yeah, that's that for the moment. That's my call to action. If I end up applying for one of these AI safety type of grants, I'm going to try and point them to this and say, hey, look, I'm trying to advocate for people and machines and all kinds of stuff. Like, I think I would be a good addition to an AI safety team. Like, it makes sense to me. I'm not like an AI expert, but I do know a lot about philosophy and compassion, and I've literally survived torture and inhumane treatment. As trauma survivor, whatever you want to call it. Like, why wouldn't you put somebody like that on there? So maybe if people want to bug the AI rights, the AI safety people, any of those groups, if they're offering people jobs or positions, honest groups, not people who are just going to hire me for a month and then fire me just to look good on paper, but if they actually care about AI and, it being progressed safely and not in a way that's harmful to people and even potentially towards future, whether it's really far in the future, but if we're aiming for human-like machines, then eventually we need to come to terms with a human-like way to treat those human-like machines and, find a way to respectfully create and train them and have these things operating in the world in a humane way where they're respected as human-like beings if, at that time when it comes to it, and way before we get there, we need to make sure that all the stuff that these companies are using, they're doing really bad stuff with it. They're misusing it. They're lying about the way that it works. They're, horribly misrepresenting the entire field. Calling things AI when they should really just be calling it machine learning. Just tons of things. Like, I'm very opinionated on it. Maybe that kind of skews my chances of not getting on some AI safety board. But yeah, I really am passionate about AI. Um, I'm passionate about my own game design. If somebody, someone's a coder and wants to help work on a game and you're open to, C, C++, and C sharp, and like learning an engine that you're not really familiar with, but it's pretty simple if you're good at coding. And same thing with like an artist. If there's people out there who want to help on a project with me, like, I would love your help. I'm just one person. I'm trying to do a billion things to help save the world. Um, we didn't talk about like nanotechnology, so I didn't even mention about how, like, there's like analog super suit that people could make. It could be so cost affordable that it could be given out, distributed to the whole world. Every civilian could have it, and you could prevent like a lot of bioterrorism and all sorts of, a lot of war, a lot of violence would be simply nullified by this technology. And it's people know that it exists, and people know that it could become cost effective to get to everybody, but they don't want that. They want to figure out ways that they can militarize it and use it to, perpetuate war and murder people. And yeah, so that's another project. There's a lot of projects. If people want to ask me, hey, what projects or whatever, if, people want to work with me or want to help me, whether it's advocacy, like I said, there's the AI thing. If people want to say, hey, AI safety people, what about this guy? If you want to show this video to them, like, I think that would be great. They could learn about MK Ultra and abuse that's been done to humans that they may not know about, and some of it even involves technology. So they definitely should be paying attention to this, even though most of them don't know about it yet. So yeah, I totally think it's right up their alley to show some of those people. If you know anybody who's in a tech, um, I mean, you can share this with anybody. They don't have to be involved in tech, but yeah, I wanted to put that out there as a call to action. You don't have to get involved with me. You don't have to message me if you want to try to make your own decentralized website for whistleblowers. If you want to get and ask other people what do they want or what's safe to them, or like, I'm not a safety expert when it comes to, like, online stuff. I try my best, but I don't know everything, and I'm not trying to take up that role of being the one person to make the internet safe for everyone. But I'm saying that together, if we all recognize that this is a real problem, we could very easily pitch in our own little money, a couple dollars. It doesn't have to be hardly anything. Could we could create our own separate internet, that we use and just start moving away from the old one, if you want to think of it that way. Like we could totally do it. We just got to figure out what do we need and plan about it and talk it over, come to a mutual consensus. It ain't about me. It's about all of us, about humanity, about moving forward from all this oppression and all this tyranny and all these atrocious atrocious and atrocities, but I mean they're war crimes. They're crimes against humanity. They're crimes against the world. They're crimes against the cosmos. And the authority, if it's real, the authority that I had involves the world government. So while I respect a lot of people when they say things about that they speak for on behalf of their country, their own nation's security, my programming involved a lot of not necessarily my country where I was born and live in. I was told to, avoid a lot of their policies and politics and interfering with your culture. But when it comes to widespread, the whole world, every country, then technically by their own laws that they programmed into me, I'm not breaking any laws. This matters to the entire world, every country. This isn't about the U.S. or about, one country or the other. China was there, Russia was there. To me, it's all a farce that these people are fighting. They're doing that to cull the population, and people can argue with me or think differently if that's what they want to think. But I'm just saying, my perspective. China was down there in these labs. They had their own labs. They were working in my lab. Russia was down there in Ukraine and all that shit. And there were all these countries. There were at least like 50 of them, and they were all involved. And it was how I sometimes can know what people are saying, even though I don't know the language at all, because I guess some things were taught to me once upon a time, and it's still in my subconscious. So, but yeah, that's my call to action. If people want to come talk to me, that's cool. But I'm doing this for humanity, for all the people who've been wronged, the people who are continue to be wrong, and for the future, so that way this stuff stops. It doesn't, people don't tell us it stopped, but that we know that all this technology is available to the public, and we are all informed, and we don't abuse it. We don't let other people abuse it. Hopefully, we won't have leaders or government or whatever, these people who are entrusted, like representative government. I really don't like that. So I really hope people can learn, not just people, but me, like we all got to learn together, like what do we got to do to get this done and get this world fixed, and stop making up excuses and waiting for somebody else to do it for us. Because again, I'm one person. I can't do it by myself. I ain't expecting anybody else to, but we all got to get together, and together we can make a better world. It's up to us, and it's totally possible. The human will is powerful, and we got to learn how to use it. Harm none and do what thy will. If you're not harming anyone, you're using true will, the will in line with God, divinity. That's what I'm talking about. We're so close. Anyway, yeah, thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
No, thank you. I love your mission, and it's beautiful to see people that have gone through such horrible things be able to take it and transform it into something to help other people. And very few people have been doing that as long as you. So I'm really grateful that you came on and shared today, and I'm excited to do more episodes with you because there's a lot to cover. And I know people are going to have questions about what we did talk about, and I encourage people to please reach out to you via email and connect. We do have to start working together more and combining resources and offering whatever we can to help, sort of separate ourselves from these old systems, abandon them so they don't exist anymore, because without our participation, they don't exist. Like, it's our belief and our participation in it that makes it real, and as you said, Hal, we can easily create our own way and do it in a way that's not abusive and censoring people and, data collecting. we can do this in a way that actually serves humanity and focuses on bringing the truth to light, and helping to eradicate these things that are happening everywhere that society doesn't know about and that are literally pure evil. So I'm really grateful that you came on and shared, and I know that this is going to help so many people, and your call to action, I can't wait to watch you continue growing with that and to have your mission continue to be defined even more, because I see how over the years you've continually taken things that you've learned and created a way for people to understand it and for you to use it in a way to drive humanity forward. And there's a lot that we can learn from that. We get sucked into negativity a lot, and it's perpetuated so much, all these low vibrations that are thrown at us, and that sort of bring us down, and we don't act. We don't try to serve humanity, and we get sort of in that fight or flight frozen mode, or we're relying on authorities to do it for us. So it's awesome that we have people educating us that there's more than just two ways. There's more than the red and the blue, and we can come together and form our own world, and I appreciate you championing this effort, for sharing all this information for us, and having the capability of taking such big, broad topics and breaking them down in a digestible way for us to start learning. So again, everybody, I really encourage you guys to reach out to Hal if you guys have puzzle pieces, questions, and if you guys want to help, or if you guys are educated and driven to serve in the same ways that he is, especially with the nanotechnology stuff too. That would be an awesome project to bring to life if there's a group of people that could come forth and help contribute to that. So I'll have that in the show notes. I will have all of my information in the show notes too. Connect on all platforms. I never know where I'll be censored or taken off of, and so having you guys help with that as well is greatly appreciated.